Hello and welcome to RPG Research. This is our weekly Tuesdays researchers meeting from 9 a.m. to noon Pacific time. And so far we have Omar in Saudi Arabia and Jonathan in Michigan have joined so far for the meeting. I'm waiting for Erik and some others to connect, I hope, soon. Did you guys have any... So I got Erik's final draft, and I went through it and did a few tweaks to it last night, sent it back to him, but it was pretty much ready. It was just a few minor things, clarifications, and very, very minor little grammatical things. He ended one sentence in a preposition of. So that's a big no-no. So I rewrote that sentence to hopefully make exactly the same meaning that he was trying to make, but not end it in of. You guys ever watch Stargate SG-1?
Yes, I have. I have not.
Okay, so it's a sci-fi series. So first there was Stargate, the movie, and in 1994 or 3 or something like that. It had Kurt Russell and some other actors and such. So the premise is that they, in Giza, Egypt, they find this big round object in the ground that's been there for thousands of years, and an archaeological dig finds it, and then over time, fast forwarding over decades, they find out that it's a wormhole portal to travel through another wormhole to another gate on the other side of another planet. And it turns out these aliens had been pretending to be the Egyptian deities and such, and that they had enslaved the human race long before, but the humans had risen up and rebelled and driven them from our planet, but that on another planet, they were still under the control. And they managed to kill off, spoilers, they managed to kill off that alien, and then that's the end of the movie. But it hinted that there might be more, and so in the series they went ahead and picked up that thread that indeed there were many more aliens pretending to be many of the other deities, and because one of them came in and kidnapped some soldiers here in the U.S. because the gate was left operational. And so they created a team to go back and try to get them, and eventually it spun into a whole command. And the series ran for 10 years. It's a science fiction show that lasted 10 years with a lot of episodes. And it's very episodal. Later, they had a little bit of arc here and there, especially later, but it's a very episodal series like Star Trek and such. And it started kind of serious, but it gets lighter and lighter, and the main actor in the series is Richard Dean Anderson from MacGyver. And Omar, I don't know, do you know who MacGyver is from the 80s?
Yes.
Okay, so he's one of the main characters on this team SG-1. And so anyway, at one point, one of the early episodes, and he does it a few times throughout the series, which is funny because he plays a character who's not very bright. Like, he's he's a colonel, he's very good at what he does, but he at least pretends, if nothing else, to really not follow anything very complicated. And yet he's a little bit of a grammar snob. And at one point, he's like knocked down by an enemy alien, and the bad guy ends a sentence, poorly, with of or something like that. And he's like, "Curse you for ending that sentence in a preposition," right? In the middle of this struggle. So it was very funny. Which by the way, they did make a role-playing game for it based on the 3.x rule, the open gaming license of D&D 3.x D20 Modern, which is actually a pretty good game. And if you ever want to do a really easy, one-shots or really episodal adventures, that's a really good way to go, because you get your mission, you go through the portal, you do your mission, you come back through the portal, you give, and you're done. So it's really easy that way. And the books, there's only a few books, there's only a few supplements, so you just need a core book is all you absolutely need. But then if you don't know the series, they've got a few, like 4 source books. And that's pretty much the whole thing, you know, besides D20 Modern, though it's pretty self-contained. And it's pretty fun. People have enjoyed that. It's not currently in print, but you can pick up the books fairly easily on Amazon in such a used form. So I just, anyway, every time I see somebody do that, I now hear that show in my head. I mean, originally it was because I went to Catholic school as a kid and the nuns would hit us with rulers and yardsticks if we used poor grammar, but but the humor of that stuck better. So who just joined us? I saw somebody joined us. Is that Erik? Is it Brandon? Is it Dan? Who is that?
It said John Hawke.
Well, no, that was John was already.
Oh, there's another John Hawke.
Oh, he must have dropped. Okay, I must have refreshed the session. Okay, that happens sometimes. Well, I wish Erik would join us. Is it? Well, let's check where you guys are at on your essays. So let's start with Omar. Where are you at on the status of your essay? Or your blog, I mean, your blog posting.
I got a very rough draft out, but I sent it to John because he was the first on the list.
Okay.
To at least get the draft, like the process going.
Okay. Now remember with the rough. Now you're not talking about the outline. You're talking about. So with the outline, we were saying fire it to all of us simultaneously.
No, I know. It was more. It was done. It was just I was missing one paragraph, and I just wanted.
Okay.
Opinion of the content more than anything.
Understood. Okay. Oh, good. Erik's here. Welcome, Erik. Okay. So, John, did you get a chance to go through that and get that back to him yet?
I just sent it to him. To be fair.
Yeah,
Okay.
It's not even like a day thing.
Well, geez, John, what are you doing slacking? Come on.
I wish I wasn't in regression. I would have finished it.
Hi, Erik.
Hello.
Welcome. How are you this morning?
I had a real hard time waking up to get here.
Yeah, me too. I've got a fatigue headache right behind my eyes because I was up till about late. I think I got a couple hours.
Yeah, I do know. I saw your message at 1 a.m. Like,
Well, I was up a lot later than that.
Working too hard.
Yeah, no, that was yesterday for me. That was, I think I finished around 4 or 5 this morning. So, yeah, I've got to get. There's a volunteer joined, Solomon, who was supposed to help as a sysadmin, and another one, Brian, who's supposed to help with all of the copy editing and social networking stuff. And I'm really anxious for them to get going. And they started onboarding, and now all of a sudden they've been kind of quiet the past week. And I'm like, no, please follow through, because that'll take about 20 hours a week off my plate, because I'm doing about 120 right now, and it's starting to take its toll. So
You're trying to get that done.
Yeah, just trying to get.
So you can rest.
Exactly. Yeah, I'm trying to get everybody onboarded and rolled up so that then I can delegate and hand off a little bit, so I can get down to something reasonable. But boy, I've got a nice fatigue headache going right now, and the Aleve hasn't kicked in yet.
Yeah, you've got to get sleep, Hawke.
I know.
The research is.
Oh, I know. Oh, it's bad. Well, my dad is 88. I think he's about to turn 89, and he's got pretty bad dementia, and I'm all too aware of the consequence of the accumulating sleep deficit that I'm building. And
well, I have read some preliminary work that sleeping in on weekends can help, so maybe you could.
Yeah, well, I mean, yeah. So they used to say that you couldn't catch up, and they found out that no, actually, sleep deficit you can to a limited extent you can kind of make up for if you keep doing it. And that used to be what I did, but right now, because we're in such a growth mode, and I'm just trying to get us to I'm trying to get RPG research to quit being dependent on me and become a more self-sufficient entity. And that means we need a certain critical mass of volunteers who are operational. And we're getting there. We're getting there really rapidly. We added number 55 this week. At this rate, we could hit 100 by summer. But the thing is, we're getting lots of game masters and player archetype specialists and a few advocates and facilitators and such, but we're not getting a lot of the kind of administrative support that we need to do all the operational stuff that I have to juggle. But the larger we get, the more of those we're starting to get, because people see that we're, a decent sized organization and want to be part of that. And reaching out to schools and such, or people who have just graduated who need to get their resumes padded a little more with real experience. And so I'm crossing my fingers that we'll get to that point and that I can get this back down to something like just 60 or 80 hours a week, which would be a vacation compared to where I'm at right now. But it's 7 days a week right now. I have meetings every single day. It's I call it startup mode, right? Because I did the whole SiliconValley.com thing, and you go through an intense ramp up period to get the momentum going and keep it going, and then once you get the pieces in place, you can start delegating and backing off, and so this isn't sustainable. But if it pays off, it'll be worth it. Things will be really running a lot better. Is everybody? Let me double check here. Everybody go ahead and log into the RPGSN. I want to make sure you guys have been popping in there, and you'll notice I've overhauled the front page on it. I just want to make sure you guys... We're going to do a formal training on the social network in a few weeks. You should have gotten an invite in the RPG Volunteers at Google Groups email. But everybody go to rpgsn.net and go to the front page there. If you have to click on the little logo in the left-hand corner once you're logged in. So tell me when you're there.
I'm there.
And when you say I, who's I?
That's Erik.
Okay.
This is Erik.
Okay.
And this is Omar, and I'm there.
Okay. And Jonathan?
Yep, I'm there. Sorry.
Okay. So, Omar, I see you got your photo. Jonathan, I see yours. And Eric's got his. Okay, good. So you guys notice I've revamped the front page for the RPGSN? Maybe you need to hit refresh.
Yep.
Yep, looks like it.
Okay, I'm hoping you guys will find that a useful layout. So you'll see in the upper left the latest forum topics. There's some forum postings I'd like you guys to keep an eye on and engage in. I mean, don't worry about the test forum and such, but the others you'll see there's alternate introduction D&D 5e one-shots, training and meeting planning discussions, game offering tiers discussion. I'd like you guys to have an eyeball on that and maybe contribute. On the right side are when I do like full-blown administrative announcements. So when I log in as admin and I do a blog posting, that shows up on the right side at the top. And it's only, a few long there. On the left side below the forum postings are anybody's user blog posting. So if you post a blog posting internally, on the intranet, not publicly, it's going to show up on the left side there, most recent, at the top. And you'll notice that Shane posted, "Why are we here?" And he says, "No, I'm not trying to start a philosophical debate. I am curious what brought everyone to join Hawke and Drawn in this crusade. Please include what interested you, what you hope to gain, and what you hope to give." So I'd love for you guys, after the stream, when you get a chance, to go ahead and post in there and share your thoughts. And then also scroll down. You'll see I've got current list of superhero RPGs we're evaluating. Any others that you recommend. So check out that list. There's a Nominate RPG Research as a charity. You can't do it until the 14th. The poll isn't enabled. But it'd be really great because we could get anywhere from... There's like a first, second, and third place, and it's between $500 to $5,000 that could potentially get donated. So that would be a nice influx. That could potentially pay for one research project, by the way, as far as our IRB cost, if we did an IRB waiver. And then the rest is not something you need to worry about. But also, as you scroll down, you'll notice on the right side, the new members shows the folks that have gone ahead and logged in. There's still quite a few others who haven't logged in yet. And you'll notice there's I put a shield, the RPG Research logo up if they didn't upload a photo. And so hopefully those folks will get logged in and get their photos added so that you guys can feel a personal connection. And then scrolling down, it says upcoming events. That's not working quite right yet. It's lumping it into category first and then date. and it's not getting rid of some of the older dates. So I've got to tweak that so it's by most recent coming up event to furthest out, and not lumping it by category first, because that makes it jump all over. So I got to fix that. And then the latest gallery images seems to be okay. So if you guys upload an image, that should show up. Audio tracks, that's a placeholder right now. It's just my music from Synthetic Zen, but I'm going to replace that with panels and lectures that are audio files from the past that you guys might find useful for listening to different topics and discussions. So you may have noticed on the public website, a number of panels and such. What I'll do is, so for example, with Erik's blog, which Erik, I sent back a reply last night, as you said you saw, and it's just a few minor things. There was one sentence I rewrote because you ended it in a preposition. We were talking about that before you got here. And the rest are just minor little tweaks and such. And then a couple little interjections. And then you decide whether you want to incorporate those or not. That's up to you. They're my suggestions. You get final say on how you want your blog posting to be. Once you're happy with it, fire that to me, and then I will go ahead and put it. So here's how I'm thinking about doing this, and I'm proposing this, so I'd like your guys' feedback. That I'll post it internally to our intranet and to our Patreon supporters simultaneously. And in the future, what I'll probably do is upper tier Patreon supporters probably will be part of the RPGSN access as a perk. We have a meeting coming up to discuss overhaul all of the Patreon goals and rewards. But that's one thing I'm thinking about, is giving our upper level Patreon supporters access to the RPGSN, because we want other people involved with this network, not just internal. We still want to be safe and all of that, but those should be people we can trust, and we can control it. Of course, we can control their access. So we would post your blog posting both internally and on Patreon to our top level tier support, and then work through the Patreon release, from the $25 on up first, then the $10 on up, and then the $1 on up. And then after that, so that's about 3 to 4 weeks later, then it goes live on the public website. Also around that time, then we would also post it on, potentially on researchgate.net and academia.edu, possibly, depends on the piece. We might reserve that just for essays, but if the blog posting's got enough meat to it, it might be worth putting on there as well. That gets a different set of eyeballs than might otherwise see it. That can be pretty useful. So that, for the blog postings, that's kind of the release cycle I'm thinking of. What do you guys think about that, Omar?
It sounds good. It sounds, it makes sense. Flows well.
Okay. Jonathan?
Yeah, I second that.
Okay. Erik?
Sounds good to me.
Okay. Just want to make sure you didn't think of any additions or tweaks or logical issues there. So, Erik, did you get a chance to look through the comments and changes I suggested?
I have not.
Okay. Yeah, so do that today, and get me your final draft back. That'll be your final draft, and I will start the process, and we'll finally get one of these blog postings out there. It's been a couple of months process, but I'm hopeful now that we're starting to get the process going. So once you finish that, Erik, have you picked what your blog posting for March is going to be?
I've been thinking about that, and I have not picked something yet.
Okay, so I would really hurry and get that rolling again, because as you can see, it takes a little bit of time, and we want to get this to be a regular routine. But you can see why this is a helpful process to get this down, because an essay is going to take longer, and we want to get it down with these easier pieces first. That once we have it down, shouldn't take so long once we get our momentum going. I also have been working on the public website on some of the workflow stuff. It's still not quite there yet, but it's getting there. But okay, well, as soon as you get a chance, Erik, go through that, and please get me back your final draft today, please, so we can start going live with that, okay? Jonathan and Omar, or I'll start with Omar. Did you guys have any overall thoughts or impressions you wanted to share after reading Erik's paper? What do you think of the topic, the content, the presentation?
I liked it. This is Jonathan. I had not been as familiar with the concept of bleed, and I actually have worked it into my blog posts to try to get some cross-referentiality going.
Good. Yeah, it's Sarah, Professor Bowman, whom he cites and such. She brings it up a lot. It's in a lot of her works. It's an area that she's pretty knowledgeable about, and it's a real thing. And Erik brings up some examples. I tweaked it a little bit. There were a couple of examples there that were more, for example, the example of math development. That's not bleed. That's specific skills development. That's not really bleed.
Right. I was going to ask about that because actually my roleplay blog is much more to do with that kind of thing.
Right.
You develop.
Right. So I'll go ahead. Let me share with you guys because you read through it. And I will, if Erik doesn't mind, I will read the portions that because you guys saw the previous version, and I'll read to you my little tweaks that I did, so that you guys are at least in the loop. And of course, you'll see the final version on our intranet as soon as he gets it to me. Okay, where did I put that? So many windows to flip through. Oh, that's right, it rebooted on me. Okay, let's see. So Omar, yeah, you're waiting for Jonathan's feedback. Jonathan, where are you at on your blog posting writing?
Yeah, so I was editing, and this happens to me, so I should have known. It sort of ballooned. So right now I'm at 2,500 words, and I'm trying to bring about a natural end. So I think probably the next 3 days I will have a pretty extensive first draft.
Okay.
Out, and I would like advice on filling in some of my knowledge gaps here as well.
Yes. Yeah, and that, especially your initial rough draft, if you just fire that off to all of us, that's where you can get that help before you get too far along, is to help fill that in before you get it too refined.
Okay.
Yeah, so remember, for your early rough draft, you just fire that to all of us, and then we give you feedback where we can while you continue working on it. You don't wait for us, you just fire it off, and then we can give you some feedback. We don't do any grammatical or major, any of the minor stuff we don't worry about. It's if we see something really major, or just suggestions for, while you're working on that, check out this content, etc., that you'll want to still be working into your early draft. So you want to do that fairly early on before you get too far along. If it ends up being a really large one, so I have that problem all the time. I never had trouble with my papers being long enough, right? My professors never had a complaint.
Yeah.
Oh, you need it to be long enough. It's not meeting the minimum. That was never my problem. My problem was bringing it down to the maximum. If they said 2 to 10 pages, they were getting a 10-page essay, and I know that was brutal for going through and grading and such. But generally, they were happy. They were glad to see the in-depth. They could tell. I always got A's, and because actually I had some professors say, you keep doing doctorate level work and you're at the only undergraduate level here, you don't have to work this hard. You don't have to have that thorough research. It's just an undergrad paper. I'm like, I know, but I got to do it right. And a lot of it is because when I worked in tech, if you screw up, it's $10,000 a minute that you're losing, so you need to be really good at your research. So that was, so I sympathize with it. It was never a problem having it this big. Getting it down and making it more concise has always been a challenge. However, I don't want you to lose any. One of the things that frustrated me with some of the papers, like sometimes they said you could only be 2 or 3 pages and that was it. And it really needed 5 or 6 pages to be done right. And so if you get to a point where you're trying to get down to a few pages equivalent, but there's really good content there on the same topic, then consider making it your next month's blog posting that you will build on. And kind of, so what I do is I'll take, what are the first points I want to make, and I'll move all of them over to a second document and save that. And it's in rough form, but I just kind of, everything I need to cut out, I don't delete, I put it in the other one so that then I can continue. Basically, it becomes a series. Because you can do that with a blog. You could have a series of posts on the same topic. And so you can build on it. And as I said, it might build towards your big essay, or it might be you just do a couple of them because you're just trying to cover, a pretty in-depth topic. And then you'll move on to another one. So if you've got good meat there that you really want to make sure gets across, but it's making it too long for you to feel comfortable for the first posting, save that in a second document to be potentially part 2 or part 3 or whatever. Okay? Jonathan?
Yeah, that sounds good. I think in the next 3 days I'll be ready to get edits and revise, and it'll probably be easily published.
Great.
This or next week. So
excellent. And remind me which topic yours was on.
Just on role playing.
Okay.
As a general concept, and then leading into role playing in games, and
okay.
Really talking about the benefits of role playing.
Excellent.
Generally and specifically.
Beautiful.
Generally and specific to games.
All right.
Because part of that is also to get my thinking clear on what it is this is that I'm doing.
Okay, good. Well, then definitely get me early drafts so I can send you really relevant links and such. You may have already found them, but just to make sure. All right. So looking through Erik's blog posting, just for those who are on the stream, I'll read the abstract and then I'll just jump to the tweaks that I did. The abstract. This document examines the phenomena of bleed in relation with role-playing gaming. Bleed is a concept which describes aspects of the player's self coming out in a game character and vice versa. I was looking to find out how bleed affected players in general when in an RPG session. The answer is... I forgot one other... Well, in your abstract, Erik, I forgot, I didn't catch it before. Remember, when you're using an abbreviation, you need to have defined it first before then you can reuse it. And your abstract it has role-playing gaming, but you didn't put in parentheses RPG or anything like that, or RPGing. And then you jump into an RPG session. So make sure you add, so when in a role-playing game, and then you could put in parentheses RPG. That would be one little tweak I missed. Now that I read it, that's all you need to do there. Just define your abbreviation. Acronym. The answer is good, bad, and everywhere in between. Please keep in mind this article is a less formal blog post. The purpose of this posting is to invite discussion, so your comments are welcomed. So then jumping ahead, I tweaked it so that when they roll their die, I changed that to dice because he was using plural reference there. Let's see. Okay, so the one that I overhauled because of the preposition said it was originally, it is the kind of bleed that people unfamiliar with RPGs and groups like BAD, Bothered About Dungeons & Dragons, are afraid of, period. So I rewrote that, and again, pending your approval. Without understanding or knowing the terminology, people unfamiliar with RPGs and groups like BAD, Bothered About Dungeons & Dragons, have expressed their fears about this kind of bleed, period. Does that still convey what you wanted to convey accurately? Or, you can tweak that further as you need, but okay.
No, that works for me.
Okay. Then you also said this could include learning improved mathematics skills from quickly adding or subtracting die rolls to learning to feel empathetic toward another person because you have lived their experience through a character. I crossed out the learning improved mathematics skills from quickly adding or subtracting dice rolls because that's actually not bleed, that's skill development, which is different. You're developing very specific skills. That isn't my understanding of bleed, and correct me if you disagree with this, because this is still a debated topic that's still being identified, is we're talking about the emotional experience and context that's bleeding one way or the other, and has isn't really about skill development. It's about the effects of one bleeding into the other and having that emotional impact that affects your behavior and such. Now, again, you could debate this. I mean, I'm not the, I'd love Bowman's feedback on that. Hopefully she will give feedback once this is public. But I was thinking that that's much more of a skills specific thing and less of a bleed phenomena issue. What do you think of that? The second half, learning to feel empathetic toward another person because you live their experience through a character and such. You're taking that experience, learning from it, and you have now more empathy. And so for me, bleed has always been much more about a feelings based experience. But I could see you making the argument the other side, but that hasn't been my interpretation. So I'm curious about your thoughts on that and everybody else's.
I hadn't exactly considered that.
Okay.
Initially. So I'm not sure. I'd have to ponder a little bit.
Yeah. So again, when I cross
now
that out,
you say that it's
yeah. Think about it. I'm not firm about that at all. It was just my initial. That's been kind of my understanding of it, but I think it's totally open for debate. And this is your piece. When I cross these things out, that does not mean this is the way it should be. It's my suggestion. You can ignore that and keep it. Feel free if you feel it fits better what you understand it to be. But that was my edit there. That it was my thinking. Jonathan, Omar, did you have any thoughts on that from your knowledge so far?
When I just looked up bleed for my article, it seemed to imply emotional content.
Yeah.
Primarily.
That was my understanding.
Something related to that, like I don't know.
Yeah.
I'm not sure exactly.
Yeah. Well, it's still being defined. It's still something that isn't
right.
100% agreement. And like anything, it's where's that boundary? How far do you take it? Which is related to the bleed, right? It's kind of, but right. And so that's why I say I think you could make some argument for it, but my understanding is it's mostly about the emotional aspect. And so empathy, I think, would transfer. I think that's something that makes sense, that you've developed this connection and feeling, and so that transfers, into your real life and vice versa. So I think that's a little broader and applicable. But mathematics skills or reading skills or research skills, things like that are very specific skills outside of emotional skills, if you will, in my understanding, weren't quite bleed. But I could be wrong about that. And so, Erik, think about that. If you want to leave the math thing in there, feel free. Or you could phrase it to say, one possible one, but maybe as debated, is these mathematical skills, whereas more emotional skills like empathy are currently more accepted as a concept. Something like that, maybe. Consider that. But go with what you want to express. It's your blog posting. But those are my thoughts on that piece. Omar, did you have any thoughts?
I didn't also think of it that way.
Okay.
So, you say that it's from an emotional point.
That was my understanding of it, but I am by no means an expert on this topic.
But what we discussed about it, that didn't really enter my mind that it was specifically emotional. But that's just me.
Okay. So think about it, Erik, and whether you want to accept that suggestion or tweak it or just leave it the way you originally had it. You decide that, okay? Erik?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Sorry, I'm zoned out, but I am here somewhere.
Okay. Then later on, I say, so you had they all break various bones, and this is about catapulting in. They all break various bones, and one even ends up unconscious. The party is utterly overwhelmed and defeated. I kind of again added a bit to that, and again, take it or leave it. It's your choice. So I rewrote that one a bit longer, which has its own issues on my end. But I stated the characters because I wanted to specify, because you said the characters and then parentheses and therefore themselves and parentheses, forgot to consider what might result from landing after being catapulted, and then you said period, and then you said they all break various bones. I just wanted to be clear for the laypersons who like to be difficult that they meant the characters. So I say the characters all break various bones, and one even ends up unconscious. So I was just a little emphasis there. If you guys have listened to or watched the panel on therapeutic GMing at PAX Unplugged back in November, December, Did any of you guys catch that video yet?
I have not.
Okay, and I'm trying to get the video posting to work on the intranet. It's not quite working yet. Well, anyway, it's on YouTube. If you just look up Therapeutic Therapeutic Gaming and PAX, 2018. One of the things that kept coming up that was, I kept interjecting jokingly. They kept they kept saying, total party kill, all the players died. And they're like, you mean the characters, right? They're like, oh yeah, we haven't killed any players yet. And it's an important little difference between players and characters. So I rewrote this one as the characters all break various bones and one even ends up unconscious. The party is utterly overwhelmed and defeated, comma, and the players personally experience the swing from elation to disappointment as is normal for the game, period. If they then take either the euphoria or disappointment out on each other in real life or home with them, ... because you had a ... there. So that I thought was a clearer delineation of bleed, because you're going to experience elation and disappointment in the game. That's just part of the game. That's part of the game experience. But if it bleeds out of the game and you take it home, or you take that out on the other players, rather than keeping it in context of the game and the characters, that's where it's bleeding in and out through that magic circle. So that was where I thought that was an important clarification. Again, you look at it, you decide if that's appropriate, but what's your initial thought on that, Erik?
Yeah, it makes more sense, a little more clear.
Okay. Omar?
Yeah, that makes sense to me too.
Okay, and Jonathan? Jonathan? Do we lose Jonathan? Hello, Jonathan. Okay, we seem to have lost him temporarily. So then you started with this may be a rather extreme example, however. I crossed that out because it wasn't as extreme as your first example, and it wasn't, it didn't seem that extreme. It was extreme in the game thing, but it didn't seem that extreme between the players and such. They didn't really, it doesn't, like, with your opening story, that was pretty extreme, where it just, she stopped going to the group and everything. That was a pretty extreme example. This didn't really specify heavy consequences, so it didn't really seem that extreme, so I thought that just wasn't even necessary to state. So I just crossed that out and started with, there are many paths available to bleed, period, is your opening for that paragraph instead. And then you go into, on the negative end, on the positive end, blah, 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 blah. That just seemed to make more sense. And then towards the end of that paragraph, the players could feel any or all of these examples of bleed at the same time and to varying degrees, even though some of these emotions seem contradictory. I tweaked that slightly to add, I changed examples of bleed to feelings, and then put in some qualifies bleed, so that it read as, the players could feel any or all of these feelings at the same time and to varying degrees, comma, some qualifying as bleed, comma, even though some of these emotions seem contradictory. Because again, the having emotional experiences in the game is part of the game. That's not necessarily bleed. It's when it comes outside of the game context that's when it is more of a bleed experience. And I think that's the main point of bleed there, is making that distinction between being in the game, being in character, experiencing that, but then not separating that. It's going outside, in and out of the circle. So it's going from feelings to bleeding through. Seems to me an important distinction. Again, I could be off on this, but those were my thoughts on that. What did you think, Erik?
Your little interjection from earlier is blowing my mind. And now I'm reconsidering all my definitions of bleed.
Oh no, no, because the rest of it's pretty much. Are you talking about the mathematics one?
Yeah.
Okay.
No, I'm just. I don't know. I feel like I've failed.
No, not at all.
I'm just. Yeah. No, that makes perfect sense.
Okay.
I'm just.
But again,
it's basically just more solidly defining bleed.
Yes.
And that makes.
Yes.
It'll make it better.
And keep in mind, this is a debated topic. There are only a few people talking about it, and it is not there isn't like heavy empirical study on this, so it's kind of more of a philosophical debate in a way, which is harder to define, right? When you get into philosophy, it gets really fuzzy. And so we're trying to, in these discussions, figure out, well, what is bleed and what is just normal experience? You know, where does it change from just the part of the activity to bleeding through that magic circle experience? And I don't think there is a definitive answer yet. I think there are a lot of proposals, and we're in the community all trying to figure that out, exactly what works and what doesn't work. And so through these efforts, we will help refine that and figure it out through logic and hopefully through empirical testing if we can figure out how to do that. So again, these are just suggestions on my part. You feel free to ignore them as you feel free. People will hopefully comment when this is posted and might feel completely differently, especially if Bowman and the others comment. You know, she may say, no, Hawke's completely wrong here. And she might say, you're much more on with the mathematics. It's everything that bleeds through. I think it's open to interpretation because it hasn't been fully defined. So do not think you've failed in any way, shape, or form. You're spot on with bringing this up for discussion. That's the beauty of this blog approach, is it lets it be more open-ended this way. We don't have to say we know the definitive answer. We don't have to have all the empirical stuff at this stage that a more formal essay is usually expecting to provide. And you do a very good job of, towards the end there, where you talk, say, okay, now here's the part for discussion, and then you ask a bunch of questions, and that's exactly what we want to engage the community. It's not required for your blog posting, but it is a really good approach for something that isn't clear cut to say, well, this is my proposal. What do you guys think? What do you think of this? What do you think of this? What do you think of this? I think that's a great way for you to wrap that up, because hopefully that will really get people to comment and to interject and give their feedback and get the community engaged in the topic. The one other, before I move on, Omar, did you have a comment on it so far?
No.
Okay, and Jonathan?
Jonathan.
Oh, we lost him. Okay, his connection or something. All right. So the other one I did, I interjected a whole piece that you just might not have been aware of. So you're talking about de-rolling and then debriefing. Debriefing is a, quote, formal space after the game for players to express their feelings. Oh, that should be feelings with an S. I didn't edit that. Sorry. You want to add an S to feelings. It just jumped on me. Darn it. Because I wasn't in the right place with my cursor. Express their feelings and share stories in a serious manner, end quote, which can help mitigate and contextualize their bleed, period. And then I added a sentence right after that. RPG research, and also RPG therapeutics and I, uses the term from the therapeutic recreation profession, calling it processing, a facilitation approach designed to facilitate learning, awareness, and change. So you've heard me use that term many times, that we do processing before and after games. And that's related to this debriefing term as well. I would recommend you add that sentence. It's something you didn't know, and you decide if you want it there or not. But I would recommend it. Just it's very specific to terminology we're trying to get out there, and it's from a recognized profession in that studies these kinds of things. Your thoughts on that, Erik?
No, I'd like to incorporate more stuff from us.
Great.
So that's perfect.
Good. Omar?
I'm sorry, I don't really have a challenge because bleed, all I know about is from what you said, so I haven't, like John or
Okay,
Erik.
that's fine, but just in case something occurs to you, yes, just in case something occurs to you, I want to give you the chance. Scrolling down a little bit, it says, fortunately, he was allowed to take over the character from one. Oh, you were talking about when I gave you the example of the 15-year-old and his character dying. But he's able to take over the character from one of our other volunteer players, and he completely changed his playstyle. And then I added comma, and his attitude outside of the game was greatly improved. So that's bleed, from my perspective, in that in the game you're going to get bummed because your character died. Now, if he walks away and he still has a bad attitude about his dead character, that's also bleed. But in this case, it was a positive bleed and that's one of the examples you were trying to give, because you said positive bleed. yes, he played better in the game, but then also when he finished the game, he came in all attitude, crossed arms. After the game, he was talking in friendly and open body language. His attitude outside of the game was greatly improved, and that was a very positive bleed situation, I thought. So I thought that it's an important thing that maybe I forget to mention when I give that example, because I talk about the in-game experience, but I need to remember to tell people. And then after the game, he was so much more upbeat and positive and friendlier, especially to the other kid that had joined as well. They were both, off the street. Just complete turnaround in one game session. It was amazing. And we see this frequently. So that would be, I would suggest adding that outside the game, some kind of phrasing that it showed up as well. Again, your choice, but just letting you know about that little detail. Comment?
No.
Okay.
I'm sucking it in. I'm soaking it in.
Good. And then at the very last sentence, you said, until then, I hope you enjoyed this delve into the concept of bleed, and I look forward to your comments. I just added this initial delve because it was your first dig into it. It's not going to necessarily be the deepest dig because it's your blog posting, so that's why I put interjected initial. I think that's probably a safer statement. But that's it. I mean, just a few little tweaks, and you keep or discard what you want, and then if you can just get it back to me today, we'll get this going live.
Cool.
Woohoo! Okay, so we lost Jonathan. Has he come back yet? No? Let me... Huh. That's a bummer that... Okay, well... Omar, did you have questions? I mean, you fired that stuff off to Jonathan, but did you have any questions that I could answer for you right now that might be of help to you, or are you just going to wait till you can go through the revision process?
I have a comment.
Okay, please.
So, the posting is a mess.
Which posting?
Mine.
Oh, okay. Well, that's fine. It's your rough draft, so that's no problem.
It's not really that. It's I've deleted so much already that I just cannot. Literally, I do not have the time to start over again. So I had enough content for 3 blog postings by this point.
Oh, well, remember, as I said, you can do that where you can save instead of deleting outright, move those pieces to separate documents so that then you can continue your train of thought later. And then you just pick one subset. What's that?
I just did not like how any of them turned out.
Okay.
At this point,
all right.
I just want to get the first one out. So
okay.
At least.
All right. Understood.
Yeah.
We'll get there. I mean, again, this is part of your training, and this is an exercise to help you get better at it. So that's okay. Just don't get stuck in analysis paralysis. It's better to put something out, even if it's crappy, because then you can learn from it. If you never get something out, it's going to make it a lot harder for you to grow and improve.
Yeah, that's my point at this time, because this is my 3rd topic so far. Because I deleted the other 2, and I was just like...
Yeah, so stop doing that and commit. Just follow through.
Even before finishing it fully, I sent it to John being like, this is my way of being committed to this one topic.
Okay, good. Yeah, because you can get analysis paralysis. What's that?
I'm sorry?
You can get yourself...
The biggest issue with it is tone.
What is what?
It's tone.
Okay.
I can't get out of the essay tone.
That's okay. No, your blog posting doesn't have to be informal. If you want it to be an essay tone, that's totally okay. Plenty of my blog postings are that way.
No, I know. I just wanted the blog posting
to
be just sort of like, like Eric's bleed one, to be just kind of a discussion more than anything. Mine is just more, here is what it is.
Sure. So let's see if I can help you overcome that kind of analysis paralysis / fear anxiety issue. So we have our internal intranet, and I would like to challenge you over the next week. While you still got to keep working on your public blog posting, but I'd like to challenge you that each day, or at least the rest of this week, that you write about any topic you want related to gaming without any going into depth. It can just be one paragraph. But on our intranet, through your own profile, you can create a blog posting, right? Don't do it on your timeline. Do it on your blog posting. So you go, You go plus blog posting plus and you create one. And just whatever topic, if you want to peruse our website, jump on YouTube, whatever, just trigger something and just write a quick thought that you have about something you see or read or hear or think of, whatever. And then just put that on the intranet and don't rewrite it.
Okay.
Just write down your thought, and I want you to do one of those each day over the next week. Okay? Yeah, well, no try, only do. Do or do not. There is no try.
Yeah, no, I will post it. It should be fine if it's private.
Yeah, it's our intranet, and people are not going to be cruel to you at all. You'll be fine. But I want you to start overcoming that basically kind of online performance anxiety, and get in the habit of getting your thoughts out there and being less overly critical of your thoughts. When we get to essays and stuff, yes, we have to be that more formal, and of course we have to go through a process. But getting an analysis paralysis doesn't help you, and it's a common problem for folks. And I want to help you get through that. So that's why I like to challenge you. Again, it's challenge by choice. You decide whether you want to do that or not. But I would recommend you do that, and I think it'll help you.
Okay.
Okay. Jonathan, are you back?
Yes, I am.
Oh,
Sorry,
good.
My internet totally crashed.
Yeah. Ouch. Did you have any comments from what you did here? If you remember.
About Erik's post?
Yes.
No, I think it's I think it's really good now.
Yeah.
I think the editing process has worked.
Good.
And by improving it, not that it was bad to begin with.
Right.
I get it, Jonathan.
Yeah, and I think this is going to help us all just put out better content, and hopefully really start to get the community more engaged in these discussions. I hope it'll take time to build up the momentum and awareness, but if we keep putting these out, and that each of you and all of us are putting content out, and it's no longer just me, I think we're going to really see some growth and discussion over time. Really looking forward to that. It'll take time because of our release cycle, because as I said, Erik, it's first going to go to our intranet and our top-level Patreon supporters, so it's going to take up to a month before the general public gets it, so there's always that delay. That's why I was anxious to get this going. But once we get it going and get the momentum going, I think we'll really see, hopefully, some vibrant discussion. And it'll probably trigger other people's blog postings and videos and such, if all goes well. That's what I'm hoping for. And be ready. I mean, when it is out on the internet, it is possible that some folks will disagree, and that's great. That's where there's room for discussion. If everybody just nods their head knowingly and just goes, yeah, that's the way it is, yeah. Not much in the way of advancement happens, right? And so it's when people start to disagree or want to have a more nuanced response, etc., that we can really grow and learn more things. So that's what I hope it will trigger, is lots of friendly debate. Okay, so, and I was talking to Omar there, Jonathan. So he says he's gone through and deleted several attempts because he's basically kind of been in analysis paralysis and self-critical about his writing style and the topics. And so I'm encouraging him to just write a very short thought of the day related to role-playing gaming on our intranet blog each day for a week, to try to help him overcome, and he can't edit it. Like, once he writes it, he's just got to fire it off and just deal with it, to try to help him kind of deal with that anxiety of too much analysis for a blog posting. And that will hopefully help him loosen up a little bit on letting it be a blog posting and have less anxiety about it not being right. Because analysis paralysis is very debilitating. And engineers get it all the time, and writers and scientists do, and lots of folks do, and so they end up never getting stuff out because it's not perfect. And the good thing is, blog posting doesn't have to be perfect. So an essay really doesn't have to be perfect, but obviously it's a higher bar, and so that does make it a little tougher. But I want to help you guys overcome that. Now, Jonathan, since you're experienced doing this, I don't expect that you'll struggle with that, but still, I think it's a good exercise. And if we get people talking in our intranet, that will be good too, to get everybody engaged there to help us build that social connection. I'm gonna. Do you guys want to bring anything else up before I go off on lectures of topics and things like that for you guys? Is there anything you guys wanted to bring up, Erik?
Not at this time.
Okay, Jonathan?
Not really, just a comment. I got in touch with a doctorate in I think his doctorate is in like games entertainment. Finland has doctorate degree programs in
Yes. Yes, they do.
games and things. They seem to be at the cutting edge of that.
They are, yeah.
Discovered recently, but his name is Marcus Montola, and he wrote the book. He wrote a couple books, but he wrote one called Pervasive Gaming,
Okay.
which is all about the pervasive subgenre.
Yeah.
And he was friendly to talk to. Got back to me really quick and talked to me about Nordic LARP. And I posed a question about an article that was posted in, because he knows I'm a counseling psychologist in training, that was posted in the IGRP.
Yes.
I think the
International
December edition.
Yep.
It was the Atwater and Rowland rules for LARP, or ethics for LARP.
Yep.
I didn't get a chance to read it yet, but I just wanted to share that email with you guys.
Cool. Please.
He basically just says, as a student of counseling psychology, did you read the piece by Atwater and Rowland? And I'd love your 2 cents. It is probably relevant to your interest whether you agree or disagree with them. Was trying to court him as well to. There's a lot of people working in the virtual reality and the AR and the pervasive game.
Yes.
And it would be great to try to get them involved. So I'm trying to court that a little
Great.
bit, see kind of what they think. And when we get to the point of opening up our internet a little bit, I think they have some of these guys are really prolific. And again, amazing that the Finnish government and private institutions support this kind of stuff. It's really
Interesting.
cool.
You know, my dad's Finnish.
Oh, really?
Yeah, mostly Finnish. Yeah, he's second generation Finnish. So.
Yeah, they had a one paper that was all about this really intense, pervasive role-play game that went on in like a nuclear bunker.
Yep.
A decommissioned nuclear bunker in Finland, and it's really interesting.
I think
stuff.
I read that at some point, because that sounds very, very familiar. And again, Sarah Lynn Bowman is heavily involved with the Nordic LARP folks, as well as IJRP and stuff.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, she's very heavily. She goes off to Europe and hangs out with the Newt Punkt and other folks all the time. She does. There's a very popular one right now that's in the States now. It's a post-apocalyptic game. I forget what it's called right now, but yeah, she's got some great stuff on that. So yeah, definitely Sarah Lynn Bowman is a really good starting point on LARP. Anything LARP. That is her main focus. She does tabletop as well, but her primary focus is LARP. Also, check out the videos and content from Living Games, the Living Games Conference. That's an annual conference of a lot of PhDs talking about LARP, role-playing gaming in general, but mostly LARP. And they crank out a lot of content. I did one video. I was supposed to come in person when it was in Texas, but I had a financial and health crisis. I couldn't make it out there, so I had to send a video that was way too compressed and accelerated, because I crammed in too much content. It's just a slideshow, and it's not very good with audio. But they have a pre-conference each year, usually at the local university, wherever it is. It's a different location each year. So last year it was Austin, Texas, where Sarah Lynn Bowman is. Year before that it was New York, and I forget where it was before that, if it was. So, but check it out, Living Games Conference, if you're at all interested in LARP material. They have a ton of it, and a lot of theoretical stuff from PhDs.
Cool.
So, anything else, Jonathan?
Nope.
Okay. Omar, did you have any topics you wanted to bring up?
Yeah, just something really quick. I just found out that not one, but 2 RPG stores opened in my city.
Woohoo!
And apparently the capital has over 3 of them.
Wow.
They're completely independent and have no relation to each other.
Now, see, I would love to see that in a blog posting, just a quick summary with some links to those.
I was thinking about it. I was thinking of maybe going and trying to ask them a few questions.
Yeah, but I mean, today, for your first one for the day, just quickly scrabble those down in the intranet blog posting, And then later, if you want to make that for your second blog posting on the public later, that would be a great one, as you have time to talk to them. What do you think?
Well, yeah, I'm hoping to be receptive to talking.
Right. Well, that's what I'm saying. Today, just write down the info that you have on the intranet, your intranet blog posting. Quickly write down what you know right now without having to do a ton of research. Just quickly write down what you heard, the rumors, what links or info you do have. Just quickly write that down and post that on your blog posting. It's a fragment, but write it down and put that on your blog posting for today. And then as you discover more, you can share that on your internal intranet. And then later, maybe for your second public blog posting topic, you'll have more data in a month or two that you can make that more formal. Because I'm sure folks would love to hear about growth of role-playing gaming in Saudi Arabia. I'm very curious. So
I am as well. I did not know it existed.
Right. Yeah. See, so that's a beautiful way to approach it. So give that a shot.
Okay, I will review all the information.
Excellent.
I found out about it through an expat website, actually.
Cool. Excellent. Yeah, you never know where these come from, and it's really important to capture these things, write them down. So I don't remember who said it, but I've heard it said many times that if it's not written down, or captured on film or video, or whatever, but this predates that. If it's not written down, it didn't happen. And it's especially, especially for thoughts, right? If you had the thought but you don't share it with anybody, it might as well not have happened, right? There's no progression from it. Maybe if you can ruminate and bring it back. But if you can capture it and hang on to it, and then you're more likely to be able to build on it for in the future, and others can build from it too. It's an overly simplistic statement, but it's an interesting starting point. So yeah, capture that, please. I would love to see the links to that. And remember, for a while there was one in Israel called Romak, lance.co.il or li, whatever it is, Israel. I think it's il. They were a game store running role-playing games, and then they added a therapist with a two-way mirror who helps. They started running multiple games for at-risk and autism spectrum teenagers using Warhammer Fantasy role-playing with a social module, helping them work on their social skills. This was years ago, and it's on our website, our old site. And they did it for several years and was doing really well, but the game store itself wasn't making enough money, and they had to close. So then they didn't have a place to do that anymore, unfortunately. They ran the program for a few years. It was doing great. They were growing, but it wasn't enough to keep the game store going, which is a common problem for role-playing game stores. But around 10 years ago, there was an article going around, and there's a lot of debate about whether this article is just a trolling article or whether it's legit. People really question its legitimacy heavily. But the article claimed that they had interviewed a general in the IDF, the Israeli Defense Force, who said basically that you will not get a security clearance in the IDF if it's found out you play role-playing games, which were apparently very popular in Israel. I think it's 2005 or so, maybe a little later. And so it was quite the heated debate about that. And so it claimed to interview a few closet gamers who said, they played role-playing games, but they could never admit it to their military peers, which is, just about everybody. They're all required to go into that for fear of losing promotion and such. So the article is in question about legitimacy of the specifics of the article, but it does elaborate a cultural problem that has occurred time and time again because of the negative inculcated attitudes about role-playing gaming. And for me, it resonated because I was kind of a closet gamer in the 90s and 2000s when I was building my career, first, in automotive and photography and in tech, computer tech, which you wouldn't think would be an issue in computer tech, at least, plenty of geeky folks in computer tech. But what I saw was if people were open gamers, and video gaming had less stigma increasingly over time. Initially it had more stigma. Over time it became more mainstream, and I hope eventually role-playing gaming will be that way too. It seems to be improving. But that I would hear as I was climbing up from, bottom of the hierarchy grunt PC tech and sysadmin and all that, working my way up through getting to the director level and, vice president level and executive levels. If it was heard that somebody was a big gamer, the negative attitude everybody had about it. So I pretty much kept my gaming interest to myself professionally. Since I was involved in information security, I didn't have a public profile. Like if you look back, there's almost no cyber footprint of me prior to starting the RPG research project. There's very little. There's a few postings on a few tech email lists and such, but I really kept a very small cyber footprint because of my knowledge and experience in information security. That had to change with the RPG research project because people wanted to connect with a human being who was putting all this stuff out there, and so I had to put myself out there more. Now here I am, live streaming and everything else, and it totally rubs me the wrong way from an information security perspective, but it is what it is. But through all of my career building, I went out of my way not to mention, if I had a game that night or anything like that, I'd just say I was hanging out with friends or something like that. There was such a stigma. It was best to just not say anything. And so I could totally see, because I've run into police, military, and other types who believe that role-playing gamers and gaming is, dangerous. And because they bought into the 80s hype or whatever, they've come to their own conclusions. In this article, he claims that people with such active imaginations will break too easily under pressure or interrogation. Interesting statements, not necessarily held up by empirical evidence, but interesting statements. Anyway, but it was really interesting to get this snapshot. I had no idea. It was because of this article that I found out that Israel actually had a pretty vibrant role-playing game community. It was kind of booming back in the early 2000s there. And it's been interesting to follow. I'd love to do, if there was a way, again, this would be another research project, but I'd love to see a graph of the wave of popularity of tabletop role-playing games, and LARP and others could be adjunct to that, on a chart, because it starts obviously in the U.S., Canada, and Western Europe, where, especially the U.S., where, Dungeons & Dragons is released. Oh, quick side thing. Have you guys seen the Blackmore documentary?
I have not.
Okay, so I need to get you guys access, because I did this for staff. We have access to it because I was a high-level Patreon supporter, or Kickstarter supporter. So I have it for you guys to view. It's important for your research, because there's been a debate for years and years and years and years and years. It's the Gary Gygax versus Dave Arneson who invented role-playing game debate. And it's not critical to everything we do, but it does have ramifications about, in our analysis of what is a real role-playing game and when did a role-playing game actually start, etc. It's an important historical context. And there have been, camps in this. And there were, legal issues about it between Gygax and Arneson during the 70s and 80s. So the Blackmore camp folks claim that Dave Arneson, had the first written role-playing game defined and underway before Gygax with his Blackmore campaign. And this documentary interviews a bunch of people and has a bunch of footage and clips and photos and such, trying to validate, claiming that no, D&D was not the first role-playing game through Gygax, that there was this other variant that Arneson had prior to 1974's publication. Our viewing of it so far is that, well, this is clearly an emotional context for these folks. This is not an objective assessment of it. However, it has some interesting tidbits in it that are fascinating to hear and watch and such. So we have a rough copy of the unedited version. It's missing titling. It's missing standardization of audio and video. It's a whole rough copy. Eventually, this will be available to the public, but that's some months out. that I can let you guys, internally as an organization for our research. So under fair use for research purposes, you can't don't redistribute it, don't send it to friends. This is for our internal organization. I can give you access to that to watch over and see what you think about their claims. It's kind of interesting. It's not, again, it's a rough copy and there are issues with it. And why was I bringing that up? Goodness gracious. Good morning. It was a tangent that I went off on, and now I've lost my train of thought. Crud. That happens sometimes when I get too tired. I'm usually pretty good at taking a roundabout way to get to my point, but getting to my point and not losing it. But sometimes I lose that train of thought. So that train got derailed. But that is something I want you guys to check out. So let me make a note. Link Blackmore for research staff. So you guys can get that added to your repertoire. Eventually there'll be a polished version of that out, and we'll see how that compares. But originally I was saying about Israel, it was really great to get this snapshot. That was it. A graph of the popularity of role-playing gaming as it's ebbed and flowed. Because it has had, taken off, and then the backlash, and sales go down, and then different releases come out and up and down, and more games, and then stigma. And so, it would be hard to, you'd have to pick what measures you can use, like number of media postings, something like that. By the way, the CRPGA, the Committee for the Advancement of Role-Playing Games Association, they're back online. They got their website back up at car-pga.org, I think. Let's see. Yeah, car-pga.org. They got their website back up. They have the largest... He's got my old logos up there. They have the largest physical repository of media mentions of role-playing gaming. And actually, I'm supposed to be having a follow-up conversation with one of the founders who has these file cabinets full of all these articles, physical copies, that need to be digitized. I'm going to try to schedule a trip down sometime this summer to go pick up those archives, because he's getting old and wants somebody else to take it over and doesn't have the means to scan it. Well, I've got a bunch of volunteers up here and scanners. I have multiple scanners that we could set up a workflow to have the volunteers just start scanning in everything and digitizing it all. But it's hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and probably thousands of pages of content. So we're having a conversation about me coming down there with the RPG bus or something and picking up those archives and then bringing them back up to here and scanning them all in. So that'll be a great addition to our research archives, because those are, what he does is the way he did it is, if you were interested in a topic, you would have to contact him by email, and then he could scan in an individual article, or originally it was photocopies, and postal mail them back to you. So we need to bring this into the 21st century. But it's a huge archive of information of all about how the media mentions of role-playing gaming. It's a lot. So that's a neat tidbit you guys should know about that'll be coming into our archives, hopefully sometime this year. Pretty excited about that. So anyway, car-pga.org is the website. Now, I recently got some interesting feedback. Okay, you guys have probably not had part of this conversation, so I'll share it with you. Did I mention to you guys that I was concerned that the second panel I was on at PAX Unplugged did not go over well because of some of the things I said?
No,
I was not privy to this.
but that was the panel I missed.
Okay.
I was there because of the enormous lines that PAX, unfortunately,
Yeah.
tweet about.
So I'll give you guys a little bit of background here. About 2 years ago, I noticed, so from 2004 to 2016, 17, I set up the RPG Research Project in 2004 as a community website to try to aggregate and share all of the available information on the effects of role-playing games and their potential uses. And at the time, there wasn't very much. There, not a lot of research out there. But I was reaching out to anybody I could find who had tried to study or use the role-playing games in their practice. And I started finding one by one all these independent silos of therapists and others who had been doing it. And I got them to slowly collaborate and join me on the website and share their info. And it became an active, thriving, vibrant international community. And that was part of how I met the folks in Israel and the folks in Denmark, etc. And that was going really well, and there was a really good communication chain, and that's how I met Sarah Lynn Bowman, and later on Adam Johns and Adam Davis, and all these great folks who are doing great things with role-playing gaming. And we were having a wonderful rapport. And I have a very much open source attitude of sharing of knowledge. The more we share, the rising tide of knowledge will float all boats. We will all benefit. There's no need to hoard the data, and we can all help each other do better in our practices, whatever the different practices are, whether it's the research, whether it's therapy, whether it's education, whatever, whether it's just being a better gamer. If we share, it helps benefit everybody. It helps improve the overall human condition. That's always been my goal. And suddenly around 2017, as I started to focus on making RPG research more of a formal entity rather than this loose amalgamation, things actually got a lot quieter. I was noticing I was a lot more out of the loop in conversations with some groups. And I wasn't sure what happened. And my assumption was that people were smelling money in the water and were going back into their silos in the hopes of, making financial, taking financial opportunity. And so they're protecting their secret sauce. And that may still be partly part of the problem. But so I did a video last summer called "Don't Split the Party," and I think it's public now. I'm still getting videos public from. I think I just finished August's backlog. I'm just now getting into September, as far as making videos public that have been just for our Patreon supporters. I'm that far behind, unfortunately. Let's see, RPG research. Don't split party. Let's see if that shows up. Okay, yeah, it is. It's from 5 months ago. It's an article. So there's also an article on the website. It's a 12-minute video. It's a research on RPG's primer, and don't split the party. Don't split the RPG community is what I'm referencing. Oh, nice video capture of my mouth open. Lovely. I just love how YouTube just sometimes the screenshot it chooses to pick. It's got me going. It's got me going, like this, with eyes closed. Lovely. Anyway, I'll have to tweak that one. It discusses much of this in depth, so I won't go into a lot of depth. It's something to consider. But my philosophy has always been about sharing and openness. But apparently, from a recent discussion I had, the impression that some folks got when they stumbled across, so back on our RPG therapeutic side, back in 2004 had first proposed the concept of certification and standards, and then in 2014 had put some drafts out there for RFCs. Basically, all these years, I was pretty much everything I put out there is a request for comments, and but they came across it around 2017 and felt that it was me saying, "This is the way things are. You should only do things this way," rather than just trying to get a baseline. And my attitude about certification is like with Microsoft and IBM. They both have a way that they say, well, this is how we prefer you do business with us. We're not saying this is the only way to do business. When you're working with Microsoft, they have a way that you want to do things. When you're working with IBM, they have a different way they want you to do things. They are different ways, and neither is necessarily superior to the other. They're just the ways that they have standardized on to function, to be able to move forward and have some sort of standards and expectation and language and methodologies. And same with certifications, with that type of certification, that it's a starting point. It's not constricting. It's a baseline. But their interpretation was that it was saying, I know it all. This is the only way to do things. And so apparently they did not, that was their interpretation. So failure of communication on my part, to make it clear that was, not what was intended. about being a know-it-all. I may come across as a know-it-all, and I'm sorry, I try not to be. I just kind of blurt a lot out. But I'm the first person to say I don't know. But if we don't have these discussions and conjecture and put these things out here, it's hard for it to advance. So I'll put a lot of stuff out there going, well, it could be this, it could be this, it could be this. And then we have discussion about what we think works and doesn't work. And that's the beauty of what we're doing here. And I've been trying to do that on the greater community. But about 2 years ago, it got, in a certain group of people, suddenly very quiet. I was clearly out of the loop and I didn't know why. And that was the first hint of it. That started about 2 years ago. The community was not sharing as well as it had before, and that was concerning. Then at PAX, Friday's panel went really well. It was the panel on therapeutic gaming. People came up to me after, and I spent the whole night just waiting for people to, people were waiting in line to talk to me, and it was a wonderful experience. And that went, it was very positive, and I was invited to go to some dinners. I was invited to join some broadcast gaming groups. I was invited to be interviewed. All these great things happened that Friday. Then Saturday, I was on another panel on accessibility and inclusiveness, and I was there for the accessibility side. And then I was going to just kind of keep out of it on the inclusiveness side, because the inclusive side now means something differently than it used to be. It used to be inclusiveness was just being open to everybody to have access, but it started to become a very specific set of inclusiveness issues that have become very highly politically charged. And I have big boots and step on toes, and when it's politically sensitive areas, it's best that, silence is the better part of valor often in that case. And for the most part, I just kind of let them talk about their topics on that, and I just kept showing accessible adaptive equipment and things like that. But at one point, there was and the main thing that came up in the conversation was give everybody an opportunity to talk. If you want to be inclusive, don't automatically judge people on their appearance. Let them have a conversation with you first, and then if their behavior warrants not wanting them at your table, then make that decision. Like, well, okay, their attitude and behavior is not going to get along here. Let's decide not to have them at the table. But one of the comments that came up was based on what they were wearing. So because of a t-shirt or a hat, they made it clear that they excluded gamers from the table because of what they were wearing. And I've had feedback over the years about gamers who have been excluded specifically because of what they were wearing. And that's a wide range of things, whether people just didn't like the costume, whether it was what was on their t-shirt or their hat, whatever. And I was like, well, wait a minute, if we're talking about inclusiveness here. So I went into professorial mode and kind of put out there, well, I agree if somebody's being intentionally offensive and it's really clearly that way, then yeah, why have that at the table? But let me give you a little, what I thought was amusing anecdote, which I've talked about before, I don't know with you guys, about the Got Root shirt. Have any of you heard me tell this one before?
I haven't. I've seen the hat of the shirt.
Okay, so in... Yeah, it's a techie joke thing. So back in the 80s, there was in 90s, there was an advertising series called Got Milk, right? They had commercials about Got Milk, and it was from the Dairy Farmers of America and all of this. And so they had a very specific font that they used in lowercase with a question mark that would say Got Milk, and that was the thing. So in the 90s boom, the dot-com boom and such, that's a lot of tech t-shirts started becoming popular and hats and such. And one of them was Got Root, and it was usually black with white text. And it's a reference, it has a couple of different references in tech. Got Root, so root in this case is a systems administrator. Do you have administrative permissions? In the Unix world, it's called root. In Windows, it would be administrator, but that's what it means. And so it could mean a couple things. For one context, for system administrators, it's like, hey, are you also a fellow sysadmin, right? Do you have root access? You control your servers. The other one is for hackers to say, hey, you got root access? You got control of the servers? You got root? Huh? You know, fellow hacker, huh? Right? So, but it was just kind of a techie, community thing. Not a big deal. Some years went by, and I was somewhere, I don't even remember where, some public space, and a person was very upset with my shirt that I was wearing at the time that said Got Root. And luckily, they stopped and confronted me about it. Now, they weren't, threatening, but they're like, hey, and the guy was Australian. And he's like, hey, mate, what's with that shirt? And they're like, well, what do you mean? It's a tech joke. And I'm like, no, that's really rude. That's really offensive. And I'm like, what? Could you elaborate? And luckily we were able to have a conversation. Now, you could have just gone by and not said anything and just been angry the whole time. And potentially, if I'd been wanting to join a game table or something, excluded me. But we had a conversation, and I found out, and because this is a cultural context, here in the States and Western Europe and such, the got root thing made sense in the tech context. Apparently down in Australia, root either means having sex or the male anatomy. So basically, I was walking around with a shirt to an Australian that says, hey, you got sex? Or, hey, you want some of this? Right? So, cultural context is really important here. Luckily, we had a conversation. He's like, oh, well, that's different. He was cool with it then. He was like, okay. And, I wasn't in Australia. I didn't know. Went in Rome, but we were here in the States. So, there was no intent at being offended. Now, to him, I was clearly wearing an intentionally offensive shirt. I was intentionally making sexual overtures, whatever. That was his perspective, that it was obvious from that cultural context. So I gave this little anecdote to the audience, and it went over like a lead balloon. This was not the right audience. It was not the right timing. There was especially somebody there who was trying to make a point from a very strongly emotional, personal perspective of feeling threatened, and my timing sucked. I should not have done it then and there with that group. The other point that was made to me is like, you clearly don't know how to speak to the PAX crowd. You're clearly too used to speaking to professionals and academics. And I was like, yeah, you're right. I only speak at panels if I'm invited. I don't hang out at game conferences and such. And so most of the time when I speak, it's professional conferences in different fields. Or if I am at a fandom thing, it's that I was invited to speak as a professional. And he said they're not interested in hearing citations. They don't want to hear statistics. They want to hear stories, but they need to be stories that are in the context that they want to hear. So anyway, I bombed, apparently. But I didn't know how to. I knew that didn't go over well because the audience didn't chuckle. Usually that's the response like you guys did a little bit about the got root thing. Usually there's a little bit of a, like, oh, okay, well, that's kind of silly. But it makes sense. And so I was using it as a teaching moment, and it was made very clear to me that was a completely inappropriate time to have a teaching moment. It was an emotional context, and I was being emotionally tone deaf. So I apparently it was so upsetting that they had to basically talk down at least one panelist and some others their level of upset with me. And apparently what I said spread throughout the convention. I was disinvited from dinner that night with these folks, and the interview that I'd had the day before has not been published, and that panel has not been published, and the silence since then from this group of folks has been deafening. So I was wondering, I was like, okay, something happened here, and I didn't know exactly. Again, this is all filling in the blanks after talking. I finally got to talk to one of them last week. I just said, hey, would you please tell me, just take a few minutes, be blunt with me, tell me what's going on here, because something's going on, and I don't know what it is. I can guess, but nobody's telling me anything, right? Rather than confronting me, everybody's just doing the silent treatment. And I can't rectify things if I don't know what the issue is. So luckily, they were kind enough to give me feedback, like, okay, that's information I can use and go forward with. And so I've been trying to work on some of the language on our site and other things to try to really emphasize. It's always been our philosophy to be open and inclusive and sharing and all of this, but really try to make sure that message is getting across more clearly, because some of my message has not been as clear as it could be. And in the end of the conversation, the person made it clear that they were glad that I was willing to hear this criticism and has re-invited me being on future panels, potentially like here at PAX West and such, potentially. So it was really good to have had that conversation. Now, whether or not the upset feelings and ruffled feathers can be smoothed over accordingly, sufficiently over time, it's hard to say. I'm not going to spend a ton of time doing that. I will make every effort going forward to try to be more considerate about that. But this is where my big boots step on toes and my big mouth has gotten me in trouble. And in the right context, there was nothing wrong with what I said, but timing is everything, and my timing was way off. So something for you guys to be aware of, and the folks out there may or may not care, but it certainly had an impact on our connection with some of the community. Now it's only about half a dozen people, but they're key people in this industry, and so it can have a real effect. And what was happening was the exact opposite of what I was trying to do. I've been trying to help the community connect and share with each other, and their perception was that we were creating a separate little bubble here in Spokane. They don't know that half our staff is outside of Spokane, right? We're at 55. Only half are in Spokane. The rest are scattered across 4 continents. So, but they don't know that, right? They just have this perception that everything's here in Spokane, and it's far from that, and it always has been. So I have to do a better job of messaging, and we're trying to get our social network manager person onboarded so we can really improve that. But it's something to be aware of. And these things happen, and they're a little, because they all play in a group together, there's a little bit of that gamer group click thing that happens. And so being outside group and inside group, that's always an issue. But the main thing is...
this was on an inclusivity panel, you said?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, this is the panel on inclusiveness and accessibility at PAX Unplugged. I managed to tick off everybody on that panel and most of the audience, it sounds like. Because after the panel, very few people came up to me, and then it was just silence after the rest of the Saturday. There were a couple other people I still talked to from Friday who hadn't been at the panel, but everybody who was there at that panel basically got shunned. So... ouch, oops, and I'm sorry. It was, the opposite of my intent, but my timing sucked. And and I've never wanted to be the spokesperson for all of this, but of necessity, I've had to be out front, and this is unfortunately the risk, because I can be too much in analytical mode when I should be more in empathetic mode sometimes. And I didn't have the empathy switch turned on at that moment. And so got to deal with that. It's not the end of the world by any means, but it's something that needs to be addressed and for you guys to be aware of. Could come up as you interview and talk to people in your research and such, just something to be aware of. We are about being open and inclusive and accessible in all ways. Our information needs to be free. We want everybody to be involved. We don't by any means know it all. We're giving the best effort with the current information available. We're sharing with everybody. We're making statements, but at the same time, they're also requests for comments. Everything we put out there is requests for comments, for feedback, so that we can further the body of knowledge. And so I really want other people to comment and bring their opinions. And our stuff changes. We do change our standards and such based on empirical information and feedback and such with what works better. But you have to take the chance of putting something out there to get the feedback. If you're too cautious about ever taking a chance to put it out there that somebody might disagree, then it's hard to get anywhere. And as long as people will have a discussion about the disagreement, then you can make progress. So this is a great, the Got Root shirt is a great example. The person spoke to me about it, disagreed, we had a discussion, and it was resolved. And I learned something new, and they learned something new. And hey, great progress. I put, blog postings and papers out all the time. And then if people respond to it and they may completely disagree, we could have a conversation and learn from each other. However, if we put stuff out there and people just shadow ban and things like that, then there's no growth potential for either side. And you become further isolated into smaller pockets and communities. And this is a social thing that's going on. And so that's something to be aware of that is out there. I hope to be able to bring all of these folks into our internal intranet to, again, I would make our intranet public, except for fear that it would become like the chaos of Facebook and Twitter and all of that. We want to keep the community a friendly, safe environment. But anybody who's in the profession, I would welcome to join our intranet, as you said, once we have the bugs worked out, once it's working smoothly. We want the entire world community to be involved in these conversations. And so it's all about inclusiveness and openness. And I think it'll get clearer over time. But especially as you guys put out more blog postings from different parts of the world, I think that message is going to be clear. Part of the problem is I'm pretty prolific. I put a lot of stuff out there, but it's all hawk, 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 hawk. And even though I'm working with other organizations and people from around the world all the time, I'm telling other people about these other people and organizations through my medium, through the website, through video, but the other people aren't, right? I'm being a spokesperson for them because that's not what they're doing. And so people keep seeing and hearing Hawke. And I'm not trying to take credit. I'm just trying to get the word out. Like, hey, this Romak group in Israel. Hey, this group in the Netherlands. Hey, Omar in Saudi Arabia is finding this stuff. We're going to share all that. But if we start getting more voices out there from diverse locations and backgrounds, I think we'll be able to break through that temporary issue that's happened. But just something to be aware of. All the more reason to get your guys' blog postings out there. So, what do you guys think?
I'm very confused about the string of events. All this happened because you said something you didn't like.
Yeah, there's here in Western Europe and the United States and Canada, there's currently a really high sensitivity to speech that is disagreed with by the in-group versus out-group speech. And while the United States has the First Amendment and everything, there's currently a social movement that's highly responsive to behavior that's considered outside of what certain groups consider socially appropriate. And it's a very emotionally strong response currently. And so you have university speakers trying to speak, and you'll have hundreds of students shouting and yelling with banners and such, trying to prevent them from speaking because they disagree with whatever the speech is that they're trying to give. So it's a current time in our culture where this has been, there isn't government banning of speech, but there's this, I think one of the terms being used right now is shame storming. And I don't know if some of you are more familiar with that terminology, but so shame storming is through the internet and other media sources, shaming people into silence and basically shaming them off the air and shaming them off the web. For example, so tying into gaming, Will Wheaton last year and Felicia Day were friends with some actor, I forget his name, and something came out, an accusation about the actor and some inappropriate behavior, or sexual or something else. And so everybody was shunning that actor, because of whatever inappropriate behavior. Now, I don't know if there was any convictions or anything. I think it was just that there were accusations, but I really don't know. I don't know the details. And Will Wheaton and Felicia Day both were silent for a while, but people kept pressing for them to give a comment. And they kind of said, well, we'll kind of wait and see what happens here. He's our friend. We don't want to really get into this. And they got in a lot of grief, especially Will Wheaton. They got lambasted on Twitter. So Will Wheaton shut down his Twitter account because it got so negative and basically stopped being online for a while. And then I guess he's slowly come back online because these things do pass in waves. But it's a consequence of social media and the internet and certain cultural changes. And I'm not an expert on this topic by a long shot. But it's something that's happening currently. And so if you say things that the group you're speaking to at the time may not agree with either your approach or what you're saying, so it may not be your content, it might just be how you're saying it, or it could be the content that you're saying, they tend to have a very strong emotional reaction to it and are very active about expressing that. But one of the ways they're quote unquote active, which is I guess more passive aggressive, is to just ignore and just and you've heard about shadow banning. Have you heard about shadow banning, Omar?
No, I have not.
So this is something that's been found out on social networks like Facebook and Twitter and elsewhere, that the organizations have set up so that certain keywords and certain individuals, when they post, nobody sees their postings because they're politically disagreeable. It's a wide range. So some of it's literally politics, like conservative versus liberal, what have you. Others are much more social topics, etc. And so there's this whole thing about shadow banning, where basically you think you have a bunch of followers on social media, you post your posting, nobody sees it because the algorithm set up on the platform has made it so that very few people or nobody will see it, without telling you that basically your content's been banned. Yeah. And it can be pretty effective. I'll give you an example. I thought it might be something related to this back in August when all of a sudden our websites didn't show up in any search engines. And I was like, what did I do? Right? What happened? In Google, in Google, all search results, it turned out they were suppressed. They weren't deleted. But all search results that linked to RPG Research, RPG Therapeutics, RPG Education, all the different sites, you could not find them in a Google search result. The only way you could find even a mention of our organizations was if somebody else had written on a different server and mentioned us, but it wasn't on our servers or anything like that. Anything that went to our servers, you could not find a search result back in August, September. I wrote about this extensively in our blog. And it turns out it was because I have several companies all at the same physical address, and I had added the listings to Google Business. And Google Business's algorithm says you're not supposed to have multiple businesses at the same postal address, so we're going to block all results showing up for all of the companies at that result because they've had a problem with fake companies. Now, my companies are all legitimate. I just run them on, a really low budget to save money. I have all of it in the same office space because between 5 companies, it just saves a lot of money, or 4 companies, and but that is against Google's algorithm for the business pages. So my solution turned out to be just delete all those pages because I never really got much benefit from it anyway, and then that turned off the blocking. But I was effectively shadow banned, even though it wasn't for political reasons, where if you didn't know about my site already, you would never find directly in any search result. That was a big hit. Our traffic, plummeted to almost nothing. That was part of what gave it away. Like, what happened with the traffic? Because we get a lot from people doing searches. And what was interesting is all the other search engines, not a problem. We were still, because we'd always been number 1 for most of our search results in Google and all the other search engines. We were still number 1 in all the other search engines, but just nothing in Google. You could scroll down page after page after page after page and not find one link to our servers. That has since been fixed, fortunately, but it took a couple of months to restabilize. Fun, huh?
Jeez, yeah.
I've been learning lots, let me tell you.
Lots to think about. Yeah, definitely lots to think about.
Yeah. Any thoughts on? So please speak up, folks. I'm trying to explain to Omar something that's a cultural difference here, and I'm just one person's perspective. Jonathan and Erik, if you have perspectives on what I was talking about with this cultural sensitivity and all these topics, I'd really appreciate your input.
Well, be careful.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we have to be careful.
Not because I'm afraid of some truth coming out, but because when you have limited, I think one of the problems is if you have limited bandwidth in being able to discuss something,
mm-hmm.
People just naturally have to use that as a heuristic.
Yep.
And it can go in either political extreme, and it can go to any degree
yep.
of extremity.
Yep.
And so some people will say things to me, and I'll think, I wonder what's behind that.
Yep.
Because you just have to make an assessment on the fly.
Right.
But it really is kind of all over the place, and so to give you, well, it's complex is the point. I guess
it
that's
is.
the best answer.
It is.
I work in a program that is very. It's actually founded on multiculturalism, so that's a big part of our.
Yeah.
That's actually our APA charter. So
right. Right. And I figured you would have some.
There's a wide diversity of views.
Right.
And I have a primarily African American faculty,
mm-hmm.
And so there's some people have a reverse sort of acceptable liberal racism where people think that if you're a Black American you have the same view on everything, but that is absolutely not true, and it's not true
right.
in academia. So
right.
Sometimes there's a false consensus
yes.
issue on some of these things that just aren't representative of the academics I know.
Yeah, I figured you would have some good insight into this.
I have heard, so I've asked a couple professors about sensitivity as an issue in the classroom. I've heard a few different things. I know that some have noticed it more than others. I think certain personalities
Mm-hmm.
A professor will bring out certain kinds of extreme reactions. I know some professors who are a little more grading probably offend people a little bit more easily.
Right.
I have heard that the reactions to that from Gen Y, is that what they call after millennial?
I'm having trouble keeping up with that.
Yeah, I mean, they're false constructs anyway.
Yeah.
They don't represent anything.
Right. They're trying to explain cohort effects, but they're way too limiting.
Right.
Yeah.
With an extremely diverse group of people.
Yeah.
I have heard that people are more reactive in the younger than, let's say, born in 96 and after.
Yeah. Well, and historically that's been the case. I mean, if you look at a lot of the before the Bolshevik Revolution, you had you had a lot of college level on down people have often, this has been a trend on and off. It kind of comes and goes. We go through these phases where the 20-somethings on down are in uproar against everybody above. I mean, we go through these phases periodically, and we're in another strong phase of that. We look back at the 60s and all the stuff that was happening then, and it bled into the 70s. So we definitely see that come and go. And so it isn't new in that context as far as this younger group. It's like, oh, these young whippersnappers, it's not like when I was a kid. Well, actually... What else are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think society has normalizing features, and actually the extreme reactions to things, although undesirable and often anti-intellectual on either side, because everything in reality, almost everything in reality, except for the exception of the world, is complex and nuanced. I do think that it serves a social function for people to react extremely, to be honest, because it normalizes things. When you have white supremacists doing marches in public again, you have a president who dog whistle endorses that, you're going to have people reacting very strongly. And that doesn't mean you endorse the extremes of every political movement, but it's kind of how, it seems like this is how open and democratic societies get back to a baseline norm. Things flare up again and then they get back down. And it's a historical trend. And there's too much external.
What was that? Was that Omar?
It can be very, very harmful for someone to be constantly shouting at something that doesn't need that much attention, because it just makes it seem a lot less of an issue afterwards.
Well, you do run the risk that, if you're always the boy who cries wolf, people may start to tend to ignore you. But as Johnson's pointing out, we go through these periods historically, and here in the United States, it's encouraged through the First Amendment and such, even though it comes and goes in enforcement. That has been the process of bloodless revolution in the United States, that we've gone through significant sociological changes by swinging from one extreme to the other through civil disobedience and the discourse that has unfortunately from time to time gotten very violent, but has not led to coups and complete collapse of government, having to restart the government. Instead, it starts showing up in voting, but people are very vociferous, and we have the freedom to do that here, so as Johnson pointed out, it swings one way and then the other, and then we get a little bit of an equilibrium for a while, and then it starts to tilt one way, and then when it gets past a certain threshold of discomfort for enough populations, then there's an uprising, verbally and such, and then it hopefully, then it swings the other way, and then you try to find equilibrium. We go through these phases throughout, at least here in the United States, throughout history, but you could see it throughout Western culture. Now, that doesn't thrive well in certain other societies, non-democratic societies. Generally with that, you see like with Venezuela and other places like that, where you have entire government collapses, where you have coups and uprisings, and that's what the system here is meant to try to prevent, is to allow this discourse to happen and then adjust to the changes in the social needs. And Jonathan, please, if you disagree, please say so. I'm just doing my best here. This is far more in your topic, but I'm just trying to explain to Omar this cultural experience. And so we here have, for the most part, tolerate it, even if we disagree with the opinions and such. To a degree, we tolerate this level of shouting and what have you. It seems totally uncivilized. to a lot of outsiders. But if in the long run it means that we stabilize without having to have a coup and the toppling of the government and, riots in the streets, unfortunately we do occasionally get a little bit of those, but on a large scale, oh my goodness, look at China. It's been a while since I did the research, but some 10, 15 years ago I was doing research, and they had 80,000 people over 1 year incarcerated because of protesting and different events. They had like thousands of different protests all over their country, and they just, arrest and are very brutal. Like their human rights issues are very strong there. 80,000 people incarcerated because of their speaking out against the government. And that's a very different environment there, because they're trying to maintain that control, although they allow a certain amount in more recent years. It's a very different environment, and it does look messy. It is messy and chaotic. Was it Ben Franklin who said democracy is the worst form of government except for any other, something like that?
Yeah. Well, so I guess my point was, I didn't guess my point was, I know my point was not necessarily putting a value judgment on the extreme reactions, because I think that, but sometimes people feel powerless and that they have to give some kind of extreme reaction. Sometimes that comes in a really ugly form.
Sure.
But these things happen, and they're sort of par for the course, and so, it's not a bad thing to worry about where they're going, but I think that they normalize them. It's like there was in Seattle, give an example, 1999, there was that huge World Trade protest.
Yep.
And that was all over the news.
Yep.
Most people that sociologists wouldn't remember, what you were talking about. The world didn't collapse. So,
right.
It's part of the process.
Yeah.
The ugly process.
Yeah.
I think, at least in the West.
Yeah, exactly. And that's my hope, is that over time that, what happened at PAX and stuff will smooth out and stabilize, but it's important to be aware of, and as you guys do research you might run into stuff and be open and share about it. So Omar, did that help clarify for you at all? Omar? Did we lose him? Oh, he's refreshing.
You might have just been super muted.
Yeah. No, he's refreshing. Welcome back, Omar.
Yeah, sorry.
No problem. Yep. Were we able to help clarify for you? I know it may be a little odd for you, but is it a little clearer for you?
Yeah. Firstly, well, sorry, John, I interrupted you before, but I hear you guys a bit delayed, so it's never know intention.
Understood.
No, I'm very, very aware of this, just because from having so many American friends and them saying things on social media or something like that, and people getting so mad, and all of us being very confused. I'm just not. That wasn't the point of the story for you. I was confused at. My issue was, fine, you can be upset with what you said and everything, but their reaction is to stop talking to you.
Yeah.
How is that helpful to anyone? Also, that's a very childish thing to do.
Well, I won't pass judgment on their approach. So for a lot of people are conflict averse. So some people are not conflict averse and are happy to be in your face and be loud and shouting, and whether it's through social media or in person. But a lot of other people, and I think this is also generational shift, are conflict averse, and so the easiest thing to do is ghost you. So in internet parlance, ghosting you is basically they stop following you, they don't respond to you on social network, and basically they're still online, but they're completely ignoring you. It's so much easier to just click ignore than to try to work through whatever disagreement you might have, because it might be too emotionally disturbing for them. It makes them too uncomfortable, and they don't want to get into it and have that intensity, so it's easier just to avoid it. So it's an avoidance response rather than a conflict response. It's basically fight or flight, right? Fight them or flee. And so when a lot of people have that strong and emotional response, for a lot of people it's easier just to flee and avoid rather than get into it.
So these people who work on inclusivity are so selfish that they refuse to include someone.
No, okay. Let's be really. Yeah, I can understand your perspective, but let's be really careful. From what was communicated to me, and again, luckily I picked the right person who I figured would be blunt with me. I figured the others would be conflict averse and wouldn't give me a frank analysis of what was going on. Luckily, this person was really helpful. A lot of them feel intimidated by me, not by any intent on my part, but I am over 6'7". I'm 6'7", 300 pounds. I'm a big guy. I can have a domineering personality. I don't mean to. I really don't. But between ADHD and impulse control and stuff, that can be an issue. And a number of these folks have abuse in their background. They have been abused in different ways, and so we can talk about triggers and all that. But it's understandable. So if we talk, part of our programs we draw from CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy, as well as CFT, compassion focused therapy. And compassion focused therapy basically builds on CBT, neuroscience, and brings in mindfulness concepts and such to help people understand why they do the things they do and not pass judgment. So we observe, we see this happening, we try to understand why it's happening from a neurological, physiological understanding and psychological understanding, and work through cognitively why you're having these reactions, why these behaviors are this way, and why you're having these cognitions. And then the compassion focused part of it is, now that you're becoming mindful and aware of this, and you can see, you understand why it makes sense that you would react this way. So when somebody is emotionally activated, the adrenaline gets going, all those stress hormones are released. And this is important to what we do with role-playing gaming. So it's an important context. If you get too much adrenaline and related stress hormones, cortisol and all that released, it anesthetizes the hippocampus and activates the amygdala, right? They're all interwoven in this. And so the amygdala is flashbulb memory and emotional context. Hippocampus is narrative memory and kind of making sense of these things in a structured way. And when you basically shut down the hippocampus, all you have to go on is emotional context and flashbulb memory. And so this is where people, like when they see a car accident and you have 10 witnesses and they give 10 different accounts of what happened and they kind of conflict, but it's from each of their perspectives. And if they were emotionally charged at the time, let's say it was a particularly gruesome accident, and I used to work security, so I had to take testimonies all the time from fights and stabbings and other things like that and shootings. And you get really conflicting perspectives because all that adrenaline rushes, fight or flight mode, and there's a filter that's created from their perspective that they don't know that they're having that experience, because to them that's their experience. And so it's really want to be careful about, especially because this was an emotional panel about emotional topics, so everybody was highly activated, and so it's easy to understand why they would feel uncomfortable in the context. Now that I have the information, I go, oh yeah, it makes sense that this happened in the context of all those variables. And it's unfortunate that my timing was off in that. With a different audience at even at a different time, if I had given that example on my own rather than as a counter to another panelist, it probably wouldn't have had such a strong reaction. But instead it felt like me trying to correct or dominate, or again, the term that was used was trying to make a learning moment at an inappropriate time, a teaching moment at an inappropriate time. I was acting professorial. I was older than everybody else on the panel. And so it came across, it was definitely contraindicated as far as I did not choose the right timing there. Now, if I've been talking to a bunch of academics or professionals, non-issue. But this was a fandom group that isn't interested in as detailed and analytical discussion, and didn't want to hear something. Just again, the timing was off. So I'd be careful to be sensitive about that. Their feelings and perspectives were completely legitimate, and we don't want to delegitimize their experience of that. I agree that it's frustrating that if it's the silent treatment, you can't do anything with, right? you can't make any progress if you don't have a give and take of information to learn from. You can't modify your behavior if you don't know what happened. So I agree with you that that's frustrating and difficult, and I'm glad I was able to get somebody to tell me. But it's understandable that it's easier to not deal with that level of stress and anxiety. They have enough on their plate. They have a lot going on with their busy lives. Some things you have to prioritize. Is it really worth dealing with or not? Does that make sense, Omar?
Sure.
Yeah, but I understand your perspective too. I mean, it's
I guess I just
frustrating.
don't really even know what the panel was discussing anyways. You just told us the name of the panel, not much else.
Yeah, I have a partial recording because when I realized I didn't see a camera rolling, so I don't even know if they recorded or not, but I did whip out my cell phone and record like the last half of the panel, which I'll release internally, so if you want to listen to it and see. I love your guys' feedback on that. It's not very good audio quality, but it's better than nothing.
You'd like to hear it.
What's that, Jonathan?
Yeah, I'd like to hear it, and I think that's the difference between intention and the ways that it's received.
Yes.
It's part of a complex dialectical process.
Yes.
Needless academic terms that I also know. But I think you've taken ownership of that, and so that's the.
What's that?
I think you've taken ownership of the miscommunication.
Yeah,
so
totally.
I think that's what's important,
Yep.
especially in helping professions.
Exactly.
This isn't a personal matter; it's just a communication issue.
And it can be resolved. Now that I know what's going on, we can do something about it. We can move forward. Before I was just guessing. I really had no I had no data to work with. Now I have data, and I can start to develop some hypotheses and try some different things and try to address it and see what happens and go from there. Put everything in a research context. So yeah, so you guys needed to be aware of that because it potentially for a little while will have some. I think it will move on. I don't think it'll be an ongoing issue as long as I don't open my big mouth again like that, which will probably happen in different contexts. But I do try to learn from my mistakes and try to not repeat them as much as possible. So. But it's interesting, and so bringing this into a role play now, Jonathan, do you have to head to class?
Yes, unfortunately.
Okay, understood. So no problem. Thank you so much, Jonathan. I really appreciate your input. I'm going to tie this in now with role playing gaming about basically at the game table being considerate of topics like this. So you'll already have plenty of background on that.
Okay,
so
thanks, guys.
Thank you. Talk to you later. So Erik and Omar. So tying this into the game table. Being aware of your players' body language and how they're responding to the environment. So in gaming, you now have things like No Thank You Evil and the X card. Are either of you familiar with those?
I am not.
Okay, Erik?
No Thank You Evil a little bit from this context, but not like everything about it.
Okay, so No Thank You Evil is one of the role-playing games we standardize as a standard game offering that's for 5 years old on up. It's a very fun little role-playing game. Adults enjoy it too. The game sessions are pretty quick, like 20, 30 minutes, and they're totally geared for little kids, but they're also a good way to get adults to loosen up because we take ourselves too seriously sometimes. So I often like to use it to get GMs and others to loosen up their stiffness and not take it quite so seriously. And so it's one of the first games that we like our GMs or second game to learn and run to give them a really much broader, open perspective about what we're doing. And it includes a little token that says No Thank You Evil so that if the game gets too scary, because you're dealing with little kids here, right? Like 5-year-olds and such. And you might be dealing with little witches and ghosts and monsters and such. And for some kids, that can be scary. So they have a little token card that says No Thank You Evil. If the story starts to get a little too scary or uncomfortable for them, they just hold up the No Thank You token, and the GM then can quickly modify the story to make it so that they're not feeling quite so scared. So let's say the monster alien, bug-eyed monster alien, whips out a big laser gun, and the kids goes, "Oh, that's too scary." And now we could argue about the merits of whether kids should confront these things more and more, and that'd be a whole other topic. And it's important that people learn to face fear and deal with it, and that's a whole topic. But in the context of current social norms, we generally consider it appropriate to not overly scare our children. We don't want them having nightmares, and especially in the context of the programs we're doing, we don't want our kids to walk away being traumatized. We want them to walk away having a good learned experience and a wonderful time and pleasant memories. So this little no thank you card gives a way to say, this is getting a little too intense. Now, talking about bleed and LARP, but also in tabletop. So prior to No Thank You Evil, where this No Thank You Evil card came from, is the X card. And John has done a whole lecture. John Welker's done a whole lecture on this in one of our videos. I should probably, I'll put a link up for that. Add that to our training. X card, video, John Welker. I'll add that to our repertoire. So John goes through this at length, but the X card was the same thing for adults. So let's say you're playing a game with a bunch of adult friends, whether it's tabletop or LARP, and you're getting into some heavy topics. And maybe it involves sexuality, maybe it involves torture, maybe it just involves, really spooky, scary stuff, whatever. But it's kind of getting a little edgy. And some of the players there, even though they're adults, might not be comfortable with it. Like, let's say, here in the West, we tend to be more uptight, especially here in the States, with the Protestant background, tend to be very uptight about sex topics. And so it might be that somebody at the table is very uncomfortable because some sort of sexual situation is being described a little more in detail than they're comfortable with. And generally, in our policy is we fade to black. We go, it happens behind the curtains. We don't go into detail. We say, yes, you go and have amorous relations with that, that non-player character. And now we roll to see if you picked up STDs or pregnancy or anything like that. But we don't go into detail about the activity. We might roll, like especially teenagers and such, might roll a D10 to see on a scale of 1 to 10 how it went. Or might even make a stat check to see if they did a good job. But we're still not going to go into detail. We're not going to... Are you guys familiar with Dr. Ruth Westheimer? Dr. Ruth Westheimer!
I am not.
Oh, boy. Omar?
No.
Oh, geez. Okay, now I'm feeling old. So she's very old, but she is an old, little Jewish psychiatrist, or psychologist, I think she's a psychiatrist, who was all about sexual education. And she was famous for being blunt about how to have good sex and good sexual relations with your partners. And so she'd be on radio or TV describing in detail what you should do to your partner to give them pleasure and such. Right? And she was doing this like in the 60s, right? 50s and 60s. This was radical. And as she became a little old lady and such, it became kind of cute and people put up with, she got to get away with more because of it. And so we don't go into that level of detail at all. Some groups do. And in fact, there is an entire book on basically figuring out all the rules to having sex in a tabletop role-playing game. An entire hardcover book based on 3rd edition D&D about there. Now, it was never published by Wizards or anything. It was self-published by a group of people. But it's out there. And John talks about that one in another... We did a whole talk show segment on sex and role-playing games at one point. I could put a link to that as well. But for some people, other people, it depends on the group. So you got to know your group well, know your audience, right? Which is the key thing. So I didn't know my audience with this panel. Same thing with your gaming group. Know your audience. You might... I remember being a teenager... I didn't do it when they were female. Well, I take that back. There was one time we had about half female, half male, and the gaming was a little racy. I was kind of surprised at how colorful both sides of the gender were being in the game there. I don't encourage that in our groups with our research. It's just such a highly charged issue. But there are, with the right mature group, people play out the sexual fantasies in a tabletop game or even in a LARP in a simulated way. They talk about in LARP simulating sex by holding someone's arm and such and saying that's simulating intercourse and such. So this is an important topic. There's an entire book on this, which we went over a little bit in one of the videos that I just mentioned. But it's Sex and Sexuality in Role-Playing Gaming. I'm not sure where I have it right now. But it's a small book, but it goes into detail about considering these topics. But one of the things is challenge by choice and being able to say no and say, you know what, this is getting uncomfortable for me. And so somebody can hold up an X card or pass the X thing and say, this is too much, please back it off, it's getting too intense. And Professor Bowman talks about this with Bleed, where and talking about the different signals and such of, hey, this is getting too real for me. For example, they talk about the example of simulated rape in LARP. That's a big one, right? That's pretty heavy. And if you have somebody who, let's say they have sexual abuse in their background, that's going to be potentially hugely triggering for PTSD if they have PTSD, and definitely uncomfortable. Now, it might be therapeutic. It might be that it's something they need to work through and they can be empowered by driving off the attempted rapist, whatever. There's ways it can be used in a positive way. But in a normal LARP group that's not therapy, you would want to say, hey, you know what, this is, hey, whoa, out of character, stop, too intense for me, I need to back out of this or something. That's an important context in role-playing gaming. And it's related to bleed, right? Eric's topic on bleed, because these things can bleed either direction. And it's these intense emotional experiences that are really important to take into context. So No Thank You Evil has that built into the system, and a number of newer games do the same thing. Now, there is argument about whether that is... Some people think it's downright silly. People are like, this is just a game. You should be able to play out any scenario you want. It's not a big deal. People are overreacting, etc. And as long as everybody at the table feels the same way, as long as everybody at your table goes, yeah, we'll play through these scenarios and rape, pillage, and plunder. It's all part of being a Viking, what have you. As long as everybody at the table is comfortable with that, and as long as you're not, then bleeding that into your real life and your behavior, fine. Whatever, you could argue. Now there are people who are strongly against that, who say that's modeling behavior. They point to the Bobo the Clown experiment and say you're training people to become more misogynistic or violent or, rapists or all these other things. So there's lots of counter arguments to these things. But again, the most important context is your audience. So when you're running a role-playing game, if you're doing a drop-in game where you don't know the players well, everybody's just a drop-in, and they're strangers, you got to play it on the safer side. You can even leave yourself open to potential lawsuits and such here in the States if you go too far. There's a term called rapey GM, rapey game master, where they're a little too lecherous and are into that. And it's a rare thing, but it is unfortunately a thing. So for some people, their idea of fantasy role-playing takes a whole other level of fantasy. And for some groups, they're perfectly okay with it. Like there's the whole BDSM community. They're fine with that. But you would not want other folks to be in that particular game who are not okay with that. So context, context, context. So, comments, please. You must have comments and questions about this.
I don't know. It's a pretty loaded topic. I would just
yes.
Stay away from it. You can do other stuff. You don't need to go down that route.
Right, and that's what we do. Is we do fade to black, or behind the curtain. We don't go into detail, but for some groups that's fine. And if it's adults and they're consenting and everybody's fine with it, more power to you. But you want to be careful in a group that you don't know well about your playstyle. So we've worked with like Montessori schools, and Montessori schools is very strict about non-violence. They really don't like violence in games. So we use No Thank You Evil. And even the LARP, we couldn't let them fight each other with the boffer LARPs. They could just fight with the air individually. So Abaddon Interaction Group, they were working separately in parallel, but not interacting with each other. No Thank You Evil is very toned down, silly violence, so they were able to tolerate that, but they would not tolerate something that had more. They were not comfortable with D&D because they thought the level of violence was too extreme. And if you play D&D, the way it's written, it just uses numbers and hit points. It doesn't even tell you what kind of damage you're doing. You say you hit them, you lose 3 hit points. You hit them, you lose 6 hit points. Now, we like to do it with more descriptive text to say you slash him across the chest and he's knocked down against the wall, But that's not actually how D&D is written. D&D is written to have a very abstract combat system, and that's part of the reason is then it's just hit points. But Montessori Schools was not comfortable with D&D because they thought it had more violence than it did. So we used something like No Thank You Evil, which was very light. And it was 11 and 12-year-olds, and they had fun with it. They enjoyed it. Doctor Who is a role-playing game that, discourages violence by making whoever wants to do the most violent action go last, and whoever wants to talk it out and work it out gets to go first. That's how your initiative is determined, from most violent to least violent, as well as also how many story points you earn and spend, and that also affects your level of development over time. So, it's a complex topic, and the important thing is to know the context for your group. And generally, we recommend just don't go down that road unless you're darn certain, if you've got a group of friends you played with or just hung out with for years, and they're not going to care, then fine, experiment with that and learn from it with your friends. But be really, really careful, because it is so emotionally charged. Erik?
Yep, it is. I could see everybody is very sensational right now.
Yeah. Well, it's not just
topics.
And it's not
spiral very quickly.
Yeah, but it isn't just now. I mean, if you look at the 1950s and all of the censorship then, and how sensitive everybody was to sexual topics, especially, but even violence. I mean, we've been through this in different forms many, many times. And you're an anthropology student, right?
Engineering.
Oh, you're engineering. I'm sorry. I was thinking of Brandon. Sorry. I'm sorry. I mixed that. Never mind. You're the engineering background. Sorry. Forgive me for that.
Yeah, I don't do people.
Yeah.
Just generally people. I work with.
I was going to say I wish Brandon was joining us this time because he's an anthropology student. So I'd really love to hear his context throughout, in the anthropological perspective on this. It would be very interesting. Yeah, well, yeah, and so with the engineering thing, you don't do people, yeah. Just do the fade to black, and they kind of did it in the Gamers 2 Darkness Rising. Now, both of you have finished watching all your movies, right? Your checklist.
Oh, I need to still work on
Erik. Erik. Have you at least watched Gamers?
Yeah. I've watched all of those. Yes, those are on the list before.
Yeah, Gamers 2 Darkness Rising.
Yes.
You've watched that?
Yes, I have.
Okay, so they have the horny bard. Right? She says, please excuse us, the horny bard does not represent us. In the opening scene, in the king's court, he and the sorceress go behind a table and go at it. Now, it's behind the scenes, it's definitely implied that, they definitely show a little bit of, humorous context, but they don't show it, right? They just go, snap, snap, go over there, and then they run behind, and then they come back later adjusting their clothing. Or later, the barmaid, he has 20 ranks in seduction, right? So, totally silly context. It's making fun of this topic that does come up. You have players that maybe in real life they don't feel they do very well with the opposite sex. So through the role-playing game, they're living vicariously to be a Don Juan, lover-type character. And that's their main goal of their NPC, or of their PC, is to hook up with as many people as possible. I had one character who decided their means of world domination was to impregnate as many characters NPCs as they could. And that they were not afraid to make approaches to fellow PCs if they were of interest as well. And it had to become very clear to this person, like, no. If you want to do this with the NPCs, okay, we'll work with it if we don't go into too much detail. And you're going to deal with the risk of STDs and everything else. But you're not going to hit on the other players. You're going to totally creep them out if you do that. Now, if you come in with a girlfriend or something like that, maybe that's okay, but usually that makes the other players uncomfortable. Like you come in with a couple who's being all intimate through the game, and everybody's like, "Come on, knock it off, guys. Go keep that in the bedroom." Right? We don't want to know about your sexual fantasies here in the game. So, again, the way they handle it in Gamers 2 Darkness Rising is about that safe threshold of, okay, we could talk about it a little bit. It happens, but we don't need to go into any great detail about it. And they handle that well, I thought, humorously. And still have consequences, right? Still like, okay, yeah, your character does that. And, oh, yeah, you picked up these STDs in the process. And, oh, yeah, this person came back 9 months later with your child, and she was supposed to be betrothed to a chieftain and was supposed to be virginal, and now her father is out to kill your character because you destroyed that alliance. Consequences that a lot of players don't think about that can be great food for the game master. And so something to keep in mind. And this is part of the reason, too, why we try to choose role-playing games that have heroic behavior modification built into them. So I just did a long talk yesterday about, in fact, the whole session. It went over. We had like a 3-hour plus conversation on versions of D&D and the strengths and weaknesses and what we like and don't like. It's more of a personal preference than anything. All the way from original D&D, all the way up through 5th edition and all the versions in between, and even the version that shall not be named. 4th edition. So that was yesterday's stream. Is that something you guys want to see? Do you care about or not?
I mean, I wouldn't mind taking a peek.
Yeah, and it was a good discussion. We had multiple. Shane was the one who brought it up. Shane Dean, one of our newer folks who's been very active. Riley was there, who's 17, and then John, and then Danielle, and myself were all involved, and an audience member interjected periodically. And so, because I've been trying to figure out why. So Shane was asking, why are we running Advanced Dungeons and Dragons 1st Edition for our Sunday show, Heroes of the Mist, as opposed to 5th Edition, which is the most current. And, if I'm running D&D, why all the way back to AD&D? And I'd spent months trying to pick the version that I wanted to run and evaluate it. And I eventually settled on AD&D 1st Edition over 5th Edition. And 5th Edition has some merit that I like and other issues that I have issues with. But it's a play style preference. But the two things that, through this conversation, because it helped me clarify in my own head, why did I pick 1st Edition, which has some issues that are kind of clunky, and luckily it is in print. They have print on demand, so one of our rules is we have to run stuff that's in print if it's a regular thing. But why did I choose 1st Edition? And through the conversation, it distilled down to a few things. One was it's actually a very simple system that emphasizes role-playing quite well without having to rely on a lot of mechanics. It's actually lighter in player mechanics than 5th Edition. A lot of people have this misconception that older game systems are all more complicated. Now, you look at Rollmaster, yeah, you could definitely say that. But the original D&D was super simple, and AD&D really, and BECMI, Basic Expert Companion, Masters, and Immortals, were actually not that complicated by today's standards. Everybody's kind of trying to go back to where we kind of started. But AD&D has some weird isms that if you didn't understand it, look really strange. And there's some isms that I could do without, Thaco and such. But it is pretty flexible and really does let you keep it open to story and doesn't limit you by heavy mechanics the way, for example, like 3rd Edition did. It also strictly enforced alignment. It's the only they got rid of that by 3rd Edition. Alignment's out there, but there's no real consequences to violating your alignment. Yeah, if you're a lawful good paladin, you might lose your powers. But for most classes, if you do radically against your alignment, there's no real consequences. 1st Edition, we read through in a segment, and in the DMG it says, and you're not even supposed to tell your players, if they go radically against their alignment so that it causes an alignment shift to the character, they lose an entire level of an experience, including the hit dice from it. pretty radical consequence. And he goes through, Guy explains why. But the main reason is to try to keep players from shifting alignment, every changing moment, and to try to encourage more heroic play. Or even if you're playing evil, at least stick to playing your character. And so those were a couple of... And then the big one is point inflation and point compression. All the newer games, you start pretty much like superheroes, right? If you look at a 5th edition character, 3rd edition character, all these other games, you often start out with a lot of abilities that you can do, depending on your class. And there isn't as much distinction between them as there used to be. Like, you can kind of get by yourself pretty well. They're pretty well balanced. There's a lot of game balance, character balance, all these things have been incorporated over the decades. And I'm not poo-pooing that balance thing necessarily, although the argument can be made that game balance is, some people argue that's a bad thing. I have different arguments with that, and I talk about that in the other stream. But you start so heroic that getting to your pinnacle is from here to here. But AD&D and the older versions, you start way down here. You're so easily killed. You have so few abilities. You're just barely one step above, all the other NPCs, the 0 level folks. You're barely above them. And the climb to become a hero is long, arduous, and difficult, and the rewards are small along the way, other than your story rewards. Great stuff can happen in the narrative, but your mechanical rewards for hit points and powers and spells are very few, and it's a long, slow climb over shards of broken glass, and you'll likely die. You'll go through your character death is very likely before you get to the pinnacle of success and really do become a true hero. It's a long climb. It's a wonderful reward, but it's a long, delayed gratification. All the newer games don't do the delayed gratification thing very well. They load you up with a lot of stuff up front. You tend to really stand out from the crowd. There are exceptions, but in general. And you get a ton of stuff every level. You get a lot of token economy rewards. You get a lot of dopamine hit rewards. You get a lot of items and skills and feats and spells and special insights and abilities. And now in 5th edition they toned down the feats, which is fine. But you get a lot every level. And over time, the progression is less. Because you reach a point where you're kind of just so powerful, and the world keeps having to become more powerful, so you have to make the creatures that much stronger, etc. So we go into great depth about that in yesterday's conversation. But I like that, and again, it's a personal preference, that long, difficult climb towards heroism. And a lot of our greatest stories are, especially in Western culture, we like the underdog. In Eastern culture and other cultures, that varies. Some of these cultures don't understand why we like the underdog attitude. They're like, no, you should choose the strong person, the person who has all the abilities and such. Why would you choose the underdog? The odds of you surviving and winning are very little, and it's a difficult world out there. You should get all the opportunity you have right at the beginning. But I definitely do like the old heroic style of the underdog struggling to succeed against all odds. And for me, both as a player and as a GM watching my players struggle and wanting them to succeed, I find that the most rewarding to have that challenge. That's not for everybody, and there's been a big cultural shift in interest in that. Comments on that?
I do remember that vaguely from playing once upon a time. It's like, oh, these guys don't really do anything. It's all later. It all happens later.
Yep. But it really changes too. Like, so first level wizard gets a 4-sided die of hit points, and very intelligent, but you get one spell and maybe some cantrips, and that's it. Maybe if you have a special wisdom, you might get 2 or 3 spells at first level. That is it. You fire off your one spell for the day. You can barely use any weapons. You're practically useless as a wizard or illusionist. Cantrips helped a little bit with that, but those are much more interesting story things. However, if you look at an 18th level fighter versus an 18th level wizard, the 18th level wizard kicks butt against, and you see that with Conan and stuff. He really hates wizards and such. And they were trying to express that it's a long delayed gratification for a bigger payoff. And it's not for everybody, by a long shot. They really changed that in later games where spellcasters get a lot more spells, they have a lot more hit points. They literally designed it, this was in their design discussion, that they wanted them to be alongside the fighter and be able to do pound for pound, it'd be in combat every round, that they wouldn't have to sit back and wait because people didn't like having to be out of the action. And they did that. They incorporated that, as well as video game attitudes and other things like that with regenerating hit points quickly, etc. So these are differences, and they affect gameplay. They directly affect gameplay. So I have run the game, and I talked about this in the other video in more depth. Here, Tomb of Horrors. Are you guys familiar with that at all?
Nope.
Omar? No? Okay. So Tomb of Horrors is one of the earliest, it's not the earliest, but it's one of the earliest modules for D&D by Gary Gygax. And it is a deadly adventure, and it's meant for higher level. So he had these players who were getting up around 10th, 15th level, and they were getting pretty cocky, and he wanted to take them down a peg. So he created this dungeon crawl called Tomb of Horrors that has very few monsters in it. There's some monsters, but very few. It's all about riddles, puzzles, traps, thinking. He calls it, he literally says in there, this is the thinking person's adventure. If you think you're going to fight your way through this and blast your way through, your character will fail. And it has a really high death ratio, TPK, and he has a lot of traps and stuff there in there that if you don't think it out, no amount of skill is going to save you. It will kill you automatically. There's no save. There's no skill check. You either figured it out or your character dies. Period. It's ruthless. But it really does promote a different playstyle. Now, whether or not it's a better playstyle, it's not. It's a playstyle, which is a lot of the puzzle solving, etc. But it really makes you think. And the argument against it is you're supposed to be able to play a character that's beyond your own abilities. Versus, no, this game you really have to use your own abilities to figure things out. Now, the GM can modify that by doing a stat check. They can say, oh, if you've got a high intelligence, if you can't figure it out, try to figure it out first. And then the GM, if they're a beneficent GM, will say, well, that's an interesting idea, but why don't you roll an intelligence check and see if that's the only things you can think of. And then if they succeed in their intelligence check, the GM might go, actually, some other things occurred to you might want to look into, kind of nudge them in the right direction. That's a good way to handle it, where you still let them do the thinking as much for themselves as possible, but you do allow the characters' exceptional abilities that are beyond their own abilities help nudge them in the right direction. And it's not a guarantee, but it could potentially help them. And so I have put every version except 4th edition, I've put groups through Tomb of Horrors for decades. It's a really good baseline on changing play style. So with 1st edition, even 2nd edition, play style didn't really change that much. You put people through Tomb of Horrors, they pretty much play it the same way, whether it was 1st edition or 2nd edition. Same 1st edition module, because they did rewrites of it, but they changed it. Same 1st edition module from the 70s, but then different versions of D&D for the player characters that I just adapted as needed. So 1st, 2nd edition D&D, not a big difference in play style. 3rd edition D&D, very noticeable change in play style. And I didn't do it with 4th edition. And in 5th edition, a radical difference in play style. So the extreme is, with 5th edition, I ran people through, and I've recorded all of this for the most part. Instead of trying to unravel clues of where the hidden tomb entrance was, because there's 3 different entrances, etc., they literally, because the cantrips are unlimited use in 5th edition, literally just started using their various cantrips to blast the hillside away, to excavate the hillside, to try to expose where the entrances were, rather than trying to figure out the clues and think it through and find it, which many other groups have done through over the decades. They just used the brute force approach because they could, because that was the easy way. It had consequences because they started to cave in the entrances and they started to set off things. So that started to discourage that approach a little bit. But that was really me on my end trying to get them to stop just blasting everything and start thinking for themselves. But it really showed up throughout the entire adventure. Now, the interesting thing is the death ratio was about the same. Only 2 characters, so everybody plays about 2 characters going in because the death rate's so high. Gygax actually typically played with 20 players. He said if you had a smaller group of only 10 players, yes, he said 10 players was a smaller group, he recommended everybody play 2 characters simultaneously because it was so deadly. And so I did that with this, where when we had smaller groups, because each night it would vary how many people showed up. We were trying to keep it around 12 or so characters. So some people were playing 2 characters. And by the end of the adventure, after many sessions, 2 characters survived, which is actually pretty much about the same from my other experiences. Now, often we had TPKs, but on average, you get 1 or 2 or 3 characters survive at the end of this grind. So it was interesting because the initial playstyle was so radically different, but the way to survive, the ones who survived are the ones who did the thinking. All the ones who went in blasting never survived, no matter what the edition. And the games that encouraged doing this more blasting away at things rather than thinking for themselves had a lot more problem surviving. And what's really interesting too is a couple of players there had played Tomb of Horrors in the original version way back when, but because they were playing it 5th edition style, their characters did not survive, which was interesting because they, of all the people, should have known better how to survive the dangers of the dungeon. But they were trying to make use of the 5th edition approach to things, and it got their characters killed rather than thinking it through. And it really is a big difference in playstyle. When you have very few hit points, and it's really easy to die, you become combat averse. 5th edition character, it's pretty hard to die. You have all those death saves, and it's pretty hard to die, especially if you have compatriots to help you and such. So people are much more likely to go in hacking and slashing and doing a combat solution or casting, blasting away with spells, etc., than an earlier edition where, like, well, can we talk this out? Can we come up with a clever way? Can we make sure that we've worked out every advantage first before we engage in combat? Really think these things out. It really is a noticeable difference in playstyle. So I go into great depth with that with the others in that video, and they had some great insights and feedback. And again, these are preferences. I'm not trying to say one is better than the other. They are preferences for different styles. So, though I know you guys don't have familiarity with this, based on what you've heard and your own experiences, what are your thoughts? I'll start with Omar. And I know, Omar, yours is more video game-ish, but hopefully, you have some feedback and thoughts.
It's all very overwhelming.
Okay. Lot of info today, huh?
I don't really have much experience with this, so I don't really know what to add.
Okay.
Because I think I played only the 1st edition.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
As far as I know.
Okay.
I don't think that I played the 5th edition was even out.
Okay.
And I'm sold as one of the simplest ones to get into.
It is. They did a lot right. I really like the character development, and they do a good job introducing people to role-playing. I would argue it's not any easier than original or 1st edition or, heck, basic. If you want the easiest edition to get into, get the basic, get the rules cyclopedia. So it's under the style of BECME. So BECME is an acronym for Basic, Expert, Companion, Masters, and Mortals. And I think I've told you guys about this before. The best introduction to role-playing ever is in the BECME box. Where is it? Here it is. Because it first starts you out basically as a choose-your-own-adventure, but learning the rules by yourself, solo. And then you do that twice, so you get familiar with the game system by yourself. You don't need any other players to learn to play. Then, for the DM side, it walks you through step by step. So, here's the player's manual for the and this is specific to the 1983 Frank Metzer copy of Basic D&D. And it's really simple. The character sheet is super simple, very little on it. And everybody's trying to go back, complains that old games were complicated, and they're trying to make them lightweight, and this is some new innovative thing. And they're like, no, this was how it used to be. Where what once was old is new again. And for the introduction, you pretty much jump in. So on page 3, you jump into your first adventure. You know, it starts to prepare you for your first adventure. And on page 3, you start your first adventure. So your hometown is just a small place with dirt roads. You set off one morning and hike to the nearby hills. There are several caves in the hills, caves where treasures can be found, guarded by monsters. You've heard that a man named Bargle may also be found in these caves. Bargle is a sort of bandit who has been stealing money, killing people, and terrorizing your town. If you can catch him, you can become a hero. And so you approach, and then you run into a goblin, and it says how to hit. In the game, whenever you try to hit a monster, there's a chance that you will miss, and of course a chance that you will hit. It is very hard for monsters to hit your fighter because of your fine chainmail armor. The goblin isn't as hard to hit because his armor is not nearly as good. To swing at the monster, you must make a hit roll. Roll the 20-sided die. If you roll an 11 or less, your character misses the goblin. If you roll a 12 or higher, you hit. The number is part of the combat rules. You will learn more about it as you continue. And so the game proceeds, and then later damage and hit points. And then later you learn about constitution and your health. Because you can get poisoned by a snake and such. Your saving throw. And as you play the game, remember I've talked about the best way for learning from the neurological perspective is learning in layers, building on prior knowledge and layering it in. This is the best version of that. Now, I did an unboxing 2 weeks ago of the new 7th edition Call of Cthulhu starter kit, and they do this. This is the Call of Cthulhu starter kit. It's the first time I've seen that in years, a proper starter kit that actually is a starter kit that assumes you've never role-played before and walks you through step by step. So on the player side, the Cthulhu 7th edition starter kit nailed it. They do what Frank Menser did here for players, which is, in my mind, the best way to introduce people, because you don't have to have a gaming group to get started learning it. Then you go to your friends and you want to now run a game. Now, the Cthulhu starter kit doesn't do that. It says you have to read through the book number 3 adventure and book number 2 game master rules, read all that first before running a game. Well, if you're new to role-playing, that's a lot of homework. The best way to get people to really enjoy this, and I did this with teaching music and such, is get them hooked doing the fun stuff first, and then they'll do the hard work over time as you layer it in, theory and things like that. So the Dungeon Master's Guide rule book in Beckme is also a similarly small, 40 pages. First book is only like 30 pages. And there's a little bit more info about creatures and stats and, page 2 and 3. But page 4 is your first game. The following adventure is designed for use by a beginning dungeon master. It will tell you what to say to the players, when and what to roll, and includes page references for additional information. Before you start, you should look through the rest of this booklet to see what information is given. Now, they're talking about just skimming it. They're saying one section, procedures and rules, gives details on handling most situations. But you don't have to. Other than just getting stuff ready, there's a pregame checklist right here that says, do all the players know how to play? So have they played through the solo adventure? Have you read this book up to this point? So page 4. Have you skimmed through the rest of the booklet just so you have a kind of rough idea of where things are? You don't have to read it through, but just kind of have a rough idea. Do you and your players know the who, why, what, when, where of the adventure, which you're going to do as you just read it aloud? Are all the characters ready to go, including equipment, which is actually incorporated into this adventure? And have the players chosen a caller and a mapper? Do they have a piece of graph paper and a pencil to map with? So it gives you a checklist of any pregame checklist of things that you should have ready to go. But really, you can just jump straight into group adventures. That's still on page 4. It says start, read the following to the players, and then in highlighted text, gray boxes, which are not the best for reading, but still at least it's clear. Many years ago, this part of the realm of man was ruled by a magic user named Gygar, a man of great and mysterious powers. He ruled the lands from his mighty castle Mistabir, located at the foot of the mountains to the north. And it goes on, and then it says, DM, stop a moment and make sure that all the characters are ready to go, then continue reading. Then you read some more, and then it says, DM, now read the next section to yourself and then continue. Now this section I read to myself is 3 tiny little paragraphs, about 2 inches long in reading. and it just tells me to look at the map, find number 1 on the page on the map on page 13. That is the location the characters start at this point. They've approached from the south, from the bottom of the map, heading north towards the top of the page. Assume that the walk from town took about an hour and that the time is now 8 a.m. Note this near the top of your adventure record sheet and keep track of the passage of time, of game time from now until the adventure ends. And then it shows some hit roll charts and saving throws that you will need during the adventure given here. And they're really simplified versions, but they're just what's needed for this specific adventure. And then it says number 1, so you're in room number 1 on the map. Read the following. And then it says DM, encourage play, and it goes back and forth. It literally holds your hand, DMing your first game, step by step by step. Is it railroady? Of course. Is it simplistic? Of course. Is it effective? Oh yeah. This is by far, to date, the best introduction to role-playing I have found, and for some reason publishers don't do it. They keep preaching to the choir, even when they say that they're assuming you don't know how to role play. They don't walk people through hand-holding. They do it for players for Call of Cthulhu, which is great. But that's the first time I've seen that in a long time. So now the only problem is this basic book is available in PDF from DriveThruRPG or RPG Now, DriveThruRPG, whatever. You can get the PDF, but it's not available in print on demand, unfortunately. And you can get the complete rules, which, because this is just levels 1 through 3, but goes all the way up to level 35. You can get the complete compendium of it, called the Rules Cyclopedia, in print on demand, but it does not have the introductory adventures, which is unfortunate that they took those out. So if you want a cheap way to learn to play D&D first by yourself and then with your friends, go grab the PDF. I think it's like $5 or something. It's very cheap. Of the basic D&D 1983 Red Book by Frank Metzer. That is the best introduction for playing and for your first time GMing. Highly recommend it. And I'm really thinking about incorporating that somehow into our baseline training when we have GMs who have not GM'd before. We occasionally get people who want to become GMs but have never GM'd. We had one player, Danielle, who's like volunteer number 7, she had never role-played before joining our organization. She did board games and card games and video games, but she'd never done tabletop role-playing. And, now she runs them at conventions and everything else, and she's, been with us about 2 years. This would have been a great way to introduce her that was less overwhelming than 5th edition. And 5th edition does a great job. It really does do a good job, but it could be even better. And I really hope that publishers will start following this model like the Cthulhu Chaosium folks did. They did a good job with the player side. Now they just need to do the same thing with the GM side. And if we had the resources, I'd have us do it, but So, comments and questions? Did I put you guys to sleep?
No, it sounds pretty interesting. I will definitely try to check it out to see, because it sounds pretty approach friendly.
Yeah, especially Omar, since you need to get a little experience of what it's like. I would highly recommend checking it out. It would be a really easy way for you to just try it yourself, and then if you wanted to get a couple of friends together to kind of just play through something really basic, just to get a very, very minimal experience with it very easily and cheaply. Erik?
I would also like to look into it.
Great. So yeah, if you go to the drivethrurpg.com and type in, trying to find the shortest way because it looks like I'm going to scroll here a bit. Let's see if I can find the shortest typing. No, that's 4th edition, darn it. And then there's expert, there's companion. Okay, there it is. So Beckme is probably the best way. So try Beckme Menser. Let's see if that's the shortest way. Okay, yeah. So if you go to drivethrurpg.com, it's TRHU, drive THRU, RPG.com, and in their search box type in Beckme, BECMI, Bravo Echo Charlie Mary Indigo. or Basic Expert Companion Masters Immortals, space Mentzer, Mentzer. You will then see the second one down is the red Basic Set Player's Manual, and then my fourth one down is Basic Set DM's Rulebook, and they are $5 each. Now, they are PDF only, unfortunately. I wish they were print on demand, but easy enough to print if you want. It's not that large a page count. As I said, the Player's Manual, I mean, if you're comfortable just using a tablet, that's fine. The Player's Manual is, okay, a little longer than I was thinking, but is only 63 pages, and the GM's Manual is only 48 pages. So we're not talking hundreds of pages here. We're talking about 100 pages, 100 or so. But that is the best introduction you could start with, is just a really basic introduction. And if they offered this as print on demand, I would have run this for Heroes of the Mist rather than AD&D First Edition. But because it wasn't available in print on demand, that meant people couldn't get a physical copy easily. I chose AD&D because AD&D you can still get print on demand with all the early books and such, the core ones. And a lot of the modules are available for print on demand, interestingly enough. And as I said, the Rules Cyclopedia is available for print on demand. So once you learn the basic with the red book, just get the Rules Cyclopedia hard copy, and that has all the rest that you really need in one book, and it's better organized too than the separate booklets. Otherwise, you have to flip through all the separate small booklets if you get higher level, because the red book just goes levels 1 through 3. Then the blue book expert level goes like 4 to 14 or something like that, 4 to 10. Then masters is like 10 to 18, etc. And so if you have to look something up, you have to flip through like 6 books. That's kind of a pain. The Rules Cyclopedia reorganized and cleaned that up and put it all in one book. It doesn't have Immortals. That's the only part that's separate. But it has all the rest of it in one book. And that's available in hard copy. And it's on that same list when you do the BECME thing. You'll see it as D&D Rules Cyclopedia Basic. And that's available in softcover color for $25, hardcover color for $30, watermark PDF plus soft color for $27, watermark PDF plus hardcover color book for $32. And it's a complete system. It has everything you need to play for years and years. But I still recommend getting the red booklets first to just learn to play that style. And then you get the cyclopedia for the rest of it. And then if you do want to go to the Immortal level, what they did after the cyclopedia is they republished Immortals with Wrath of the Immortals box set, which I'm not sure. Let's see if they offer that in print or not. But you will see that this whole, new simple gaming thing is the same thing over. We've gone back to where we started, and it really isn't that as radical as people would like to, because they don't know. People didn't know. This stuff was out of print, and people just didn't know any better, and they thought they were being innovative, and really they're just being regressive in a lot of ways. Let's see. So is that available? I don't see that box. Okay, Immortals is available as a separate thing, but I don't see if it's available for Wrath of the Immortals, but that's okay. Anyway, yeah, by far the best introduction to role-playing for an absolute beginner. Highly recommend it. Additional comments and questions before we wrap up here?
Nothing on my end.
Yeah, nothing on my end.
Okay. How did you guys feel about us doing more of a lecture today than we've done in a while?
Oh, I'm glad for it. Although the administrative stuff is kind of important. So
Yes.
It was fine, but
Okay.
it's nice to get back to a little bit more information.
Yeah. Drink from the fire hose once again.
Yes.
Omar?
Yeah, I agree with that.
Okay. So go ahead and, Eric, if you can hurry and polish up your paper and get that back to me so we can start getting that published. Do you think you'll be able to get that today?
I should be able to. Yeah.
Okay, fingers crossed. I'm excited to get that rolled out. And Omar, I look forward to seeing your little simple posting on our intranet today sometime, okay? Remember, we talked about just the quick listing about the stores in your area. That would be a great starting one.
Yeah.
So I'm really very interested in learning more about that. So thank you guys. I hope you learned lots and found it useful. Thank you for all the work you're doing. It's really appreciated. We're just getting started here, right? This is just the bare bones beginning of what could be some really awesome stuff happening over time. And I think we're going to, this community is growing so fast. Think about 2 years ago, we were at volunteer number 6. We added volunteer number 55 this week. In just 2 years. At this current projection with the acceleration that we're at and as our infrastructure and process is getting better, it's looking like we might hit 100 by summer. So I don't know if, for me, that's like, whoa. I'm like in shock. Because for so long it was just me and then, a handful of people. Very excited that it's starting to get to that level. And I think we'll be able to do some awesome stuff that way. Also, make sure you get a chance, if you get a chance, answer Shane's post in the intranet asking about why you're here, what motivates you. That would be great to see. And it'd be good to kind of self-assess that as well for yourselves. I think that would be a neat little, it's just a forum posting. It's nothing formal. It's just a conversation. Just trying to get us to all connect as a community. So definitely post on that when you get a chance as well. Okay?
Okay.
All right. Well, thank you both very much. Be well, and I'll follow you guys online, and then we'll be back again next Tuesday from 9 a.m. to noon is our researchers meeting, and it's more of this. Some administrative stuff, and then, various theory and other discussion of topics related to role-playing games. Ed, really appreciate the work you guys are doing. Erik, I'm really glad that your paper is about to get out there. I'm looking forward to seeing how, it'll take a while because of the release process, but I'm really looking forward to seeing what kind of conversations as we spread the word on that it generates. And go ahead, start working on your outline of your next paper. If you need to scroll through the website.
Next paper is going to be bleed, a comprehensive definition.
Might be a little early for that. But yeah, start thinking about your next blog topic. Maybe scroll through, the website, see if anything invigorates if you don't already have something on your list. And Omar, as you delete ideas, save those ideas for later because it might be something you want to write in more depth later. We want to capture those things. We want to know your thoughts and insights.
Yeah, we'll see.
Okay. All right, guys. Take care. I'll catch you later. Bye.
See ya.
Bye-bye.
And thank you. And if you're not yet a donor, please swing by rpgresearch.com/RPG research or /donate. rpgresearch.com/donate. And you have a bunch of ways to donate, and we'd really appreciate it. We do research studies and community programs on role-playing games and how they can help improve lives. And we do it. We're a 100% volunteer community, and we exist through your support. So please do consider helping donate. Even just a few bucks a month goes a long way to help cover just operating costs. And we keep ours really minimal. We run on open source. I'm hosting it, self-hosting on my house to keep it as cheap as possible. Your dollars go towards specifically to the programs and to the research, and we're very lean and mean that way. So we really appreciate your support. And again, if you're not a Patreon supporter, you'll get access to videos, essays, these blog postings we're talking about. All of this you get first through Patreon, and then a month or later. For example, I'm still trying to get stuff out to the public that I released to Patreon supporters back in August, and I'm just now caught up to about September, that are just now going public in January and February. So Patreon supporters get really early access. They get it first as a thank you, because we don't really have any tangible goods except all of this information. So do consider becoming a Patreon supporter at patreon.com/RPG research. Wherever you may be well, happy gaming, and namarie.